Hello, everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. It's been 20 years, but my hands still get shaky when I think about it. I've never really talked about what happened that night in 2003 outside of my immediate family. They believed me because they saw the state I was in when I got home. Everyone else would probably think I'm crazy. I was 17 then, just a regular kid from Fayetteville, Tennessee. You know how it is when you're that age. You think you're invincible, that bad things only happen to other people. I had my dad's old Chevy, a girlfriend named Melissa, and not a care in the world, until that night in October. I'd been at Melissa's house watching movies. We lost track of time, and before I knew it, it was already past 11:30, my curfew. My parents were pretty strict about that kind of thing, especially on school nights. I remember looking at my watch and practically jumping off the couch. My dad would ground me for sure if I was late again this month. I said a quick goodbye to Melissa and her parents and jumped in my car. Her house was about 25 minutes from mine if you took the main roads, but I knew a shortcut through some back roads that could save me maybe 8-10 minutes. I'd taken it dozens of times before. The night was clear but dark, no moon that I can remember. I turned onto Howell Hill Road, which eventually connects to Teal Hollow Road, a pretty straight stretch where you can make good time. The radio was playing some song I don't remember, and I was focused on getting home, rehearsing excuses in my head for why I was late. I was pushing maybe 55-60 mph down that straight portion of Teal Hollow. There weren't any streetlights, just my headlights cutting through the darkness. The trees on either side of the road created this tunnel effect that always made me drive a little faster, like I was being funneled forward. That's when I saw something on the side of the road ahead. At first, I thought it was a deer or maybe even a cow that had gotten through someone's fence. It was just this dark shape at the edge of my headlights. I started to slow down. Hitting a deer at that speed would wreck my car and probably me too. My dad would kill me if I totaled his Chevy. But then the thing stood up. That's the only way I can describe it. It was on all fours, I think, and then it just rose up, not like an animal standing on its hind legs to look around, but fully upright like a person. My first thought was that someone had crashed their car and was wandering around injured. There were some sharp curves before that straight stretch, and accidents weren't uncommon. So I slowed down even more as I approached. But something felt off. The proportions were wrong, too tall, too something. As I passed where it was standing, now just off the shoulder of the road, I hit the brakes hard. I can still hear that sound, the screech of tires on asphalt. I stopped maybe 100-200 yards past where I'd seen the figure. I remember sitting there for a second, debating whether to just keep going. But what if someone was hurt? I couldn't just leave them. I put the car in reverse and started backing up slowly, watching in my rearview mirror. That's when I saw it had walked onto the road behind me. My headlights weren't directly on it, so it was mostly silhouetted against the slightly lighter background of the night sky. But I could see enough. And that's when I realized this wasn't a person. No way. This thing was huge. I'm not exaggerating when I say it was at least 6'1" 2 tall, maybe 7, and wide, like almost half the width of my car. I couldn't make out details in the darkness, but its outline was unmistakably bipedal, standing on 2 legs like a human. But no human is built like that. Its proportions were all wrong. Its arms seemed too long, hanging down at its sides. I stopped backing up when I was maybe 25-30 yards from it. It just stood there in the middle of the road, not moving. I couldn't see a face. I couldn't tell if it was looking at me. It was just this massive, dark figure blocking the road. That's when the fear hit me, not the nervous fear of being caught breaking curfew, but primal terror. every instinct screaming at me to get away. My skin went cold, and I swear every hair on my body stood up at once. I couldn't breathe right. My chest felt tight, like someone was sitting on it. I fumbled with the gear shift, throwing the car into drive. My hands were shaking so bad I almost couldn't do it. Then I floored it. The tires spun for a second before catching, and I took off around that thing, accelerating as fast as that old Chevy could go. I didn't look in my mirrors. I didn't want to know if it was following me or not. I just drove, white-knuckling the steering wheel, until I hit Highway 64. Even then, with other cars around, I didn't slow down until I was almost home. When I pulled into our driveway, my mom was waiting up for me. She was about to start yelling about me being late, but one look at my face and she knew something was wrong. I was shaking all over. I couldn't stop. And I was crying, which was embarrassing for a 17-year-old guy, but I couldn't help it. I told them what happened. My dad thought maybe it was just some guy in the road trying to get me to stop. There had been reports of robberies like that before. But he didn't see what I saw. No human is built like that thing was, and the way it moved, so smooth when it stood up, not awkward or jerky like a person would be. I couldn't sleep that night, or the next. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that silhouette standing in the road. I kept thinking about what might have happened if I'd stopped completely, if I'd gotten out of the car like I almost did when I first thought it was an injured driver. For weeks afterward, I took the long way home, even if it meant being late. My parents understood. They never pushed me to go back that way. Even now, 20 years later, I refuse to drive Teal Hollow Road after dark. During daylight, sure, it's just a road, but at night, no way. I've spent a lot of time trying to rationalize what I saw. Could it have been a bear standing up? No. The proportions were all wrong and its movement was too fluid. A person in some kind of costume? At 11:40 at night on a back road in rural Tennessee? Seems unlikely. Besides, no costume could capture the wrongness of what I saw. Sometimes I almost convince myself it was just my headlights playing tricks, creating shadows that my scared teenage brain misinterpreted. But then I remember the absolute certainty I felt in that moment. That wasn't a deer, wasn't a cow, wasn't a person, it was something else. I've never looked into local legends or stories about that area. Part of me doesn't want to know. What if other people have seen it too? What would that mean? I'm not sure I want those answers. The strangest part is how it just stood there watching me. It didn't charge at my car or run away like an animal would. It just observed. That's what haunts me most. The feeling that it was studying me just as much as I was studying it. Last year, my wife and I were driving back from a dinner with friends. GPS took us down some back roads as a shortcut, and I suddenly realized we were approaching Teal Hollow. It was dark, around the same time of night. I made her turn around right there in the middle of the road. She thought I was crazy until I finally told her this story. I'd never told her before. It sounds so ridiculous when you say it out loud. I saw something on a dark road when I was a teenager, and I've been afraid of that place ever since. But it's more than that. It's the certainty that for a brief moment, I glimpsed something that shouldn't exist, something that doesn't fit into the world as I understand it. And if that thing exists, what else might be out there in the dark? Every now and then, I'll be driving at night on some empty stretch of road, and my headlights will catch something by the roadside. A deer, a reflection from a sign, anything. And for a split second, my heart stops. My palms get sweaty, and I'm 17 again, watching something impossible stand up in the darkness. The logical part of my brain says there must be an explanation. The part of me that was there that night knows better. I don't expect anyone to believe me. I'm not sure I would believe it if someone told me this story, but I know what I saw, and I know that Teal Hollow Road isn't just a road to me anymore. It's a boundary between the world I thought I lived in and something else, something I caught a glimpse of for just a few seconds on an October night 20 years ago. I still live in Tennessee, not far from Fayetteville. Sometimes I wonder if that thing is still out there, standing by the roadside, waiting for headlights to approach in the darkness. Sometimes I dream about it. In the dreams, I don't drive away. In the dreams, I get out of the car. But I always wake up before I see its face, if it even had one. Maybe one day I'll work up the courage to drive that road again at night, to face whatever it was that scared me so badly. But probably not. Some things are better left alone, some roads better left untraveled after dark. All I know is that something was on that road that night. Something big that walked on two legs but wasn't a man. And knowing that changed everything for me. Story 2. I never thought I'd be sharing this. For almost 50 years, I've kept this experience mostly to myself, except for telling my immediate family. But something about getting older makes you care less about what others think. Maybe it's time the truth came out, even if people don't believe me. It was March 11th, 1975. I remember the date perfectly because it was my cousin Marla's birthday the day before, and we were still riding the sugar high from all the cake. I was 11 years old, living on the Oneida Geeth Reservation in upstate New York. If you've never been to the reservation, it's mostly woods with houses scattered throughout, connected by worn dirt roads and footpaths that only us locals knew. That morning started like any other. It was chilly but not freezing. Typical March weather. The snow had mostly melted, leaving the ground muddy and wet. Mom had asked me to return a casserole dish to my Aunt Sarah, who lived about 2 miles away. Marla was staying with her mom, my aunt, and we'd planned that I would pick her up so we could play together. We set out from Aunt Sarah's house around 11 a.m. I remember checking the clock in her kitchen before we left, and Aunt Sarah reminding us to be home before dark. "Take the road," she'd said, which is exactly what we didn't do once we were out of sight of her house. The road would have added nearly a mile to our journey. There was a path through the woods that all the reservation kids used. It cut right through and popped out about a half-mile from my house. Marla suggested we take the shortcut, and I agreed without hesitation. We weren't afraid of the woods. As Mohawk children, we'd been taught to respect the forest, but not fear it. The woods were part of us, part of our heritage. The path started behind my aunt's garden shed. It was narrow but clear. Generations of footsteps had packed the earth down. The bare trees allowed sunlight to filter through, creating patterns on the ground. We walked side by side where the path allowed, chatting about school and the birthday party. About 10 minutes in, something changed. I can't explain exactly what it was, but the air felt different, heavier somehow. I noticed Marla had stopped talking mid-sentence. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I shook my head, but strained to listen. There was nothing except the normal forest sounds, wind in the branches, distant birds. "I thought I heard something moving," she said, her voice unnaturally quiet. We stood still for a moment, but when nothing happened, we continued walking. But something had shifted. We were both quieter now, more alert. I kept glancing over my shoulder, feeling like someone was watching us. You know that prickly feeling on the back of your neck? It was like that, but all over my body. The path eventually opened up to what we called the gravel pits, an abandoned quarry where the county used to mine gravel. It was a favorite play spot for reservation kids, with hills and mounds to climb and slide down. The ground here was a mix of gravel and hardened mud, with steep embankments around the edges. I remember feeling relieved when we reached the clearing. The open space seemed safer somehow, with better visibility than the dense woods. The feeling of being watched faded a bit, and we started to relax again. "Race you to the bottom," I called to Marla, pointing to a steep embankment. Without waiting for her answer, I ran and slid down the muddy slope, my boots leaving trails in the half-frozen mud. I landed at the bottom with a thud and a laugh. Marla followed more carefully, picking her way down. When she reached the bottom, she realized one of her gloves was missing. "I think I dropped it coming down," she said, looking back up the slope. "I'll go look." I nodded, already distracted by a frozen mud pile that had formed interesting shapes as it had thawed and refrozen. I started climbing it while Marla made her way back up the embankment. I'm not sure how much time passed, maybe 2 or 3 minutes, when I heard Marla call my name. There was something off about her voice. It wasn't panicked exactly, but tight and controlled, like she was trying very hard to sound normal. "Cheryl, can you come here a second?" I looked up from my mud pile. Marla was standing at the top of the embankment, her body rigid. She had both her gloves now clutched tightly in one hand. "What is it?" I called back. "Just come here, please." I sighed, annoyed at having to climb back up, but something in her tone made me move. As I got closer, I could see her face was pale, her eyes wide and fixed on something behind me that I couldn't see. "What's wrong?" I asked as I reached the top. She didn't answer directly. Instead, she grabbed my arm, hard, and pulled me close to her side. "We need to go," she whispered, her breath warm against my cold ear. "Right now." "Why? What's—" "I saw an arm." She cut me off, her voice barely audible. A huge black arm. It reached for me from behind that dead tree when I was looking for my glove. I felt my stomach drop. An arm? Like a person's arm? She shook her head slightly, eyes still darting around us. Too big, way too big, and covered in black hair. My first thought was a bear, but bears weren't common in our area, and they should have been hibernating anyway. Plus, bear fur is usually brown, not black. Maybe it was a hunter, I suggested, though I knew hunters would have been wearing orange or camo, not black. Marla's grip on my arm tightened. "It wasn't human," she said with such certainty that I believed her instantly. "It tried to grab me, Cheryl." That was enough for both of us. Without another word, we started running along the edge of the pit toward the main road. It was farther than continuing through the woods would have been, but neither of us wanted to go back into the trees. We ran as fast as our legs could carry us, the frozen ground hard under our boots. My breath came in painful gasps, visible in the cold air. We were about 50 yards from where we'd been when Marla suddenly stopped dead in her tracks. I nearly ran into her back. "What?" "Look," she whispered, pointing toward a stand of sumac trees that bordered the eastern edge of the gravel pit. I'll never forget what I saw. Never. It's burned into my memory like a brand. Moving through the sumac trees, which were at least 6 to 8 feet tall, was something impossible, something that shouldn't exist. Its head and shoulders were clearly visible above the treetops. It was walking upright, on 2 legs, with long arms swinging at its sides. The creature was covered in dark, almost black fur that seemed to absorb the sunlight rather than reflect it. My brain couldn't process what my eyes were seeing. This thing was huge. Impossibly huge, and it had covered at least 150 feet from where Marla had first seen the arm, moving silently despite its size. We stood frozen, unable to move as it walked through the trees. It didn't seem to notice us, or if it did, it didn't care. Its gait was smooth, almost graceful despite its bulk. Then, as if suddenly sensing our presence, it stopped. Slowly, it turned its head in our direction. I couldn't see its face clearly from that distance, but I felt its gaze lock onto us. A primal fear unlike anything I'd ever experienced surged through my body. Every instinct screamed at me to run. "Go!" I screamed, finding my voice at last. We bolted toward the road, not daring to look back. I could hear Marla sobbing as she ran beside me. My own tears blurred my vision, but terror kept my legs pumping. We hit the main road and kept running, not slowing until we reached my house. We burst through the front door, startling my mother, who was washing dishes in the kitchen. "Sasquatch!" we both cried between desperate gasps for air. "We saw Sasquatch!" Mom laughed at first, thinking we were playing a game, but when she saw our faces, saw the genuine terror, her smile faded. "Girls, there's no such thing as Sasquatch," she said gently, putting down her dishcloth. You probably saw a bear or a very tall man in a dark coat. It wasn't a bear, I insisted, my voice shaking. It wasn't human. It was walking through the sumac trees, Mom. We could see its head above the trees. My father came in from the other room, drawn by our commotion. He listened to our story with a frown, looking increasingly concerned. Not about Sasquatch, but about us. You girls have been listening to too many of Old Joe's stories, he said firmly. Old Joe was an elder who often told traditional tales to the reservation children. There's nothing in those woods except deer and the occasional hunter. But we knew what we'd seen, and as the day went on, and we calmed down enough to talk about it rationally, more details came back to us. The way it moved, fluid and silent, the massive breadth of its shoulders, the way its fur seemed to swallow the light. Dad called Aunt Sarah to tell her what happened. I could hear her laughing through the phone. Nobody believed us. They thought we'd let our imaginations run wild, influenced by traditional stories and too many comic books. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that massive figure turning toward us. I kept thinking about how it had moved from one side of the gravel pit to the other so quickly and silently, how its arm had reached for Marla. The next day, my father and uncle walked the path we'd taken, checking for signs. They found nothing unusual, no strange footprints, no broken branches except those that could be explained by deer or normal forest activity. This only reinforced their belief that we'd imagined the whole thing. But Marla and I knew differently. We stopped using the forest shortcut after that. We never went to the gravel pits again. As years passed, I researched what we'd seen. I learned that many indigenous tribes have stories about a creature like the one we encountered. In our Mohawk traditions, there are tales of the stone giants and other forest beings that protect sacred places. It made me wonder if what we saw was heading toward what my grandfather once called the hidden place, a cave system that our people considered sacred. Those caves are real, running deep beneath our reservation lands. Elders say they connect to other reservations through underground channels, though I've never explored them to confirm. But I remembered my grandfather saying that sacred beings use these passages to travel unseen by the modern world. One thing became clearer to me as I got older. What we saw that day was a protective spirit. It didn't harm us when it could have. It didn't chase us. It was simply there, perhaps guarding the entrance to something sacred. About 15 years after the incident, I started having dreams about it. Not nightmares exactly, but intense, vivid dreams where the creature, I can't think of it as just Bigfoot anymore, would appear at the edge of our reservation. In these dreams, it wasn't alone. There were others like it, standing silently among the trees, watching, waiting. In the most recurring dream, they come forward during some kind of catastrophe, fires burning in the distance, the sky dark with smoke, and lead our people into the caves. We follow them underground, walking for what seems like days through tunnels that glow with a soft blue light. When we emerge, the world is green and new again. It wasn't until I mentioned these dreams to my grandmother, shortly before she passed, that she told me they aligned with some of our oldest prophecies, that after a time of great trouble and a cleansing fire, the original people would go underground for safety, guided by the guardians of the earth. When it was time, we would emerge to begin life anew. I'm 70 years old now. I've lived a full life, raised children, and watched grandchildren come into this world. I've never again seen what Marla and I saw that day, though I've felt its presence sometimes when walking near the edges of the reservation. That same heavy feeling in the air, the sense of being watched. Part of me hopes I never encounter it again. The memory still sends chills through me, still makes my heart race, but another part, a deeper part that's connected to the stories and wisdom of my ancestors, understands that if I do see it again, especially with others of its kind, it might mean that it's time Time for the prophecy to unfold. That day, in March 1975, changed me forever. It opened my eyes to the reality that our world is more complex, more mysterious than most people allow themselves to believe. There are things in the forests, in the wild places, that exist beyond our understanding. Things that have always been there, watching, waiting. Sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I find myself standing at my window, looking out at the dark line of trees that mark the edge of the reservation. And I wonder, is it out there right now? Is it watching? And when the time comes, will I have the courage to follow where it leads? Story 3. I've been debating whether to share this for days now. I'm not someone who seeks attention or makes up stories. At 70 years old, I've seen plenty in my life as both a nurse and pilot, and I consider myself a practical, level-headed person. But what happened on October 28th has shaken me to my core, and I need to tell someone who might understand or have experienced something similar. I live alone in a cabin in the Oregon Cascades, about 120 feet above the South Fork of the Mackenzie River. It's remote out here, heavily wooded with few neighbors scattered among the trees. I've lived here since retiring, enjoying the peace and solitude with my little terrier mix, Cooper. The surrounding area is crisscrossed with hiking trails and old logging roads, and I've always felt safe despite the isolation. That morning started like any other. I was inside making breakfast around 9:30 a.m. when Cooper, who was in his crate on the front porch, started barking frantically. Not his usual "there's a squirrel" bark, but something more urgent and alarmed. It was odd because Cooper is generally pretty quiet unless there's a good reason. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and went to check what had him so worked up. The October air was crisp, but not too cold. One of those beautiful fall days with clear skies. When I stepped onto the porch, Cooper was standing in his crate, hackles raised, barking toward the driveway. At first I didn't see anything, then movement caught my eye about 150 feet away, just past where my gravel driveway meets the main road. What I saw made me freeze. There was a dark figure walking on two legs. My first thought was, that's a person, but something was immediately obviously wrong. It was hunched over initially, moving with a strange gait. Then it straightened up, and I could see it was tall, taller than any person I know. Its arms were long and swung oddly at its sides, not like a human's would. The head was turned away from me, but I could make out what seemed like a rounded head set on an unusually short neck, almost like the head was sitting directly on the shoulders. My mind immediately thought chimpanzee, though I knew that made no sense. It was much too large, and the proportions weren't right. But something about the way it moved reminded me of great apes I'd seen in documentaries. I stood there watching it for maybe 15 seconds, completely still, afraid any movement might draw its attention. The figure moved eastward down the gravel road and disappeared behind a thick stand of trees. I expected to see it reappear near my neighbor's driveway, about 300 feet down the road, but it never did. Cooper was still barking hysterically. I ran inside and grabbed the air horn I keep for wildlife encounters. Bears are common in these parts, and cautiously walked down my 250-foot driveway. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. I kept looking around, half expecting the figure to emerge from the trees. When I reached the main road, I looked in both directions. Nothing. It was completely empty and quiet. Too quiet. No birds, no rustling in the underbrush, just silence, except for the sound of my own breathing. It was as if everything in the forest was holding its breath. I stood there for a few minutes, trying to process what I'd seen. Part of me wanted to write it off as a hiker in dark clothes, but deep down, I knew that wasn't right. The proportions were wrong. The movement was wrong. Everything about it was wrong. I walked back to the cabin, locked the doors, something I rarely do during daylight hours, and tried to calm down. I kept looking out the windows, scanning the tree line. Cooper was still agitated, whining and pacing in his crate. I brought him inside, thinking he might settle down, but he stayed close to me, trembling slightly. Around noon, I decided I needed to investigate. The rational part of my brain said I had to find a logical explanation. Maybe it was just a person after all, and the distance had distorted my perception. I put Cooper on his leash, grabbed the air horn again, and headed out. As soon as we reached the spot where the driveway meets the road, Cooper's behavior changed dramatically. This is a dog who just 2 weeks earlier had tried to chase a bear out of our yard, and here he was, pulling back on the leash, refusing to walk further. His tail was tucked between his legs, and he was shaking visibly. I've never seen him react that way to anything. I had to pick him up to carry him to the area where I'd seen the figure emerge from the woods. The ground there was mostly dry and gravelly, not ideal for tracks, but I noticed the weeds were bent and broken in a path leading from the forest to the road. There was a small ditch between the woods and the road, and I could see where something had stepped up onto the gravel. What made my blood run cold were the impressions in the harder packed dirt at the road's edge. 3 distinct heel marks about 12 inches long, with what looked like faint toe impressions at the front. They weren't clear tracks, the ground was too hard for that, but they were undeniably foot-shaped. Bare footprints, human-like, but too large. I stood there staring at those impressions, Cooper whimpering in my arms, and suddenly felt exposed. The sense that I was being watched washed over me so strongly that I turned in a complete circle, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved, but the feeling persisted. That's when I remembered the noises I'd heard the week before. I had been working in my garden, which is fenced to keep deer out, when I heard twigs snapping and rustling in the woods just behind it. Cooper had started barking then too, facing the forest, with his ears perked up. I had used my air horn, and the noises stopped momentarily, only to start again a few minutes later, slightly further away. I dismissed it as deer, or maybe a bear. Now I wasn't so sure. I hurried back to the cabin, Cooper still in my arms. Once inside, I closed all the blinds and tried to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe it was a person wearing some kind of costume. But who would be wandering around these remote woods dressed up? And the foot impressions didn't look like they came from shoes. I spent the rest of the day inside, jumping at every sound. As evening approached, I found myself checking the locks repeatedly and keeping Cooper close. That night, I barely slept, lying awake listening for any unusual sounds outside. The thing is, I've lived in these woods for years. I know what bears look like, even when they stand on their hind legs. This wasn't a bear. It moved too fluidly on 2 legs, with purpose and balance. The proportions were all wrong for any animal I'm familiar with. I've been reluctant to use the word, even in my own thoughts, but there's only one thing that matches what I saw: Sasquatch. Even typing that makes me feel ridiculous. I've never believed in Bigfoot or any cryptids. I've always been the person who needs evidence, who looks for the rational explanation, but I know what I saw. In the days since, I've found myself avoiding certain parts of my property. I don't go out after dusk, and I've been keeping Cooper inside more than usual. He seems more alert now, often staring out windows or perking up his ears at sounds I can't hear. I checked the spot where I saw the footprints the next day, but rain had washed away any evidence. Part of me is relieved that no one else was with me to witness this. It would sound crazy to most people I know. The other part wishes I had someone to corroborate what I saw, to tell me I'm not losing my mind. I've lived near these forests for years, hiked countless miles of trails, and never once felt uncomfortable or unwelcome. Now I find myself hesitating before stepping outside, scanning the tree line before walking to my car. Yesterday I drove into town and subtly asked some locals if they'd ever heard strange stories about the woods around here. Most just mentioned the usual bear sightings, but one older man at the hardware store gave me an odd look and asked why I wanted to know. When I said I'd seen something unusual, he nodded slowly and said, "These mountains keep their secrets. Some things aren't meant to be understood." Then he changed the subject. I've spent a lifetime trusting my senses and judgment. As a nurse, I had to make quick assessments based on what I observed. As a pilot, my life depended on accurately perceiving my environment. I'm not prone to flights of fancy or misinterpreting what I see, but what I saw that day doesn't fit into my understanding of the world. It was real, it was there, and then it vanished. I've gone over it 1,000 times in my mind, questioning every detail, but I keep coming back to the same conclusion. I saw something that shouldn't exist, according to everything I've been taught to believe. I'm not sure what I'm looking for by sharing this: validation, similar experiences, or just a way to process what happened. All I know is that the woods around my cabin don't feel the same anymore. There's a weight to the silence now, a watchfulness in the shadows between the trees. Cooper still barks at the forest edge sometimes, staring intently at nothing I can see. And occasionally, when the wind is still and the night is quiet, I think I hear twigs snapping in the darkness beyond my windows. I used to find comfort in knowing and understanding my surroundings. Now I find myself wondering what else might be out there, just beyond the reach of what we're willing to see. Story 4. I've never been the type to share personal stuff online, but I need to get this off my chest. What I experienced last August has been eating away at me for months. I've tried talking to friends and family, but the looks they give me, well, you can imagine, so here goes. It was August 28th, 2022. I'd been staying at my family's small cabin resort near Leavenworth, Washington for about a week. We've owned this property for generations. Nothing fancy, just 6 rustic cabins scattered around a meadow surrounded by dense pine forest. I love it there. Always have. Growing up, I spent every summer exploring those woods, fishing in the creek that runs about a quarter-mile behind the property. That night I couldn't sleep. The cabins were all booked with end-of-summer tourists, and I'd given up my usual cabin to a family with kids. Instead, I was bunking in the small office building where we handled check-ins. The room was stuffy, and my mind wouldn't shut off. Around 11:30 p.m., I decided to go for a walk. The full moon was incredibly bright, one of those nights where you barely need a flashlight. I grabbed a light jacket, even August nights get chilly in the mountains, my phone, and headed out. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. My parents were asleep in their cabin, and it wasn't like I was hiking miles into the wilderness. Just a short walk to clear my head. The meadow looked almost magical in the moonlight. The grass was silvery, and I could see every detail of the surrounding tree line. I've always loved how quiet it gets out there. No traffic noise, no city hum, just natural sounds, wind in the pines, occasional owl hoots, the constant background chorus of frogs from the creek. I walked across the meadow toward the edge of the woods, where there's a fallen log I like to sit on. It's partially concealed by brush, but gives a perfect view of the entire meadow and all the cabins. I'd left the porch lights on, so the cabins made little pools of yellow light in the distance. The time was around midnight when I settled on the log. I remember checking my phone, thinking I'd give myself 30 minutes before heading back. The frogs were especially loud that night. Their calls echoed through the trees, creating this weirdly hypnotic rhythm. I remember feeling totally at peace. Maybe the most relaxed I'd felt all summer. That's when everything changed. The first thing I noticed was a subtle shift in the forest sounds. The frogs didn't exactly go silent all at once, but their calls became less frequent, less coordinated. I didn't think much of it initially. Animals pause sometimes, right? But then I noticed the quiet spreading. The crickets stopped. The occasional rustling in the underbrush ceased. Then I heard it, a cracking sound like someone stepping on a thick branch, but louder than what a person would make. It came from deeper in the forest, maybe 50 yards behind where I was sitting. My first thought was deer. We get lots of them. Or maybe a black bear. They're around, though we rarely see them. I stayed still, not wanting to spook whatever it was. Another crack, louder this time, then another. Whatever was moving through the woods was big, and it was moving quickly. Too quickly and too deliberately for a deer or bear. The sound pattern was all wrong too. It wasn't the 4-beat rhythm of a quadruped. It sounded like 2 legs, heavy steps spaced apart like a person would walk, but with much more force. I felt the first real spike of fear then. I considered making a run for it, back to the cabins. But the meadow is wide open, a good 200 yards of exposed ground. If someone was out there, they'd see me immediately. I decided to stay put, thinking whatever it was would pass by without noticing me. The footsteps, God, I hate calling them that, but that's what they sounded like, grew louder, closer. Now I could hear other sounds between the steps, branches being pushed aside, underbrush crushing down, heavy breathing, not the snorting of a bear, but deep, rhythmic breathing, human-like, but deeper. Raspier. I pressed myself against the trunk of a pine tree next to my log, trying to make myself as small as possible. The moonlight that had seemed so beautiful minutes before now felt like a spotlight. I was wearing a dark jacket, but my face and hands seemed to glow in the silvery light. The movement was maybe 30 feet away now. I could see branches swaying, small trees bending as something pushed through them. I held my breath. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure whatever it was could hear it. Then it stepped into a patch where the canopy opened up, and the moonlight hit it directly. I've spent months trying to convince myself I didn't see what I saw, that my eyes were playing tricks, that it was just a bear standing on its hind legs, that I dozed off and had a vivid nightmare. But I know what I saw. It was massive, 7, maybe 8 feet tall, walking upright on 2 legs with a gait that was similar to human, but not quite right. Longer strides, slightly stooped posture. Its body was covered in dark hair or fur, thick and matted in places, not like a costume. The hair moved naturally with its body. In the moonlight, I could see it was dark brown, or maybe reddish brown, not black. Its arms were proportionally longer than a human's, hanging down almost to its knees. The hands, I don't want to call them hands, but I don't know what else to call them, were massive, with what looked like opposable thumbs. I couldn't make out all the details of its face. Thank God for that. But what I did see has haunted my dreams every night since. A prominent brow ridge, deep-set eyes that caught the moonlight in a way that made them shine, a broad, flat nose, no muzzle like a bear would have. It moved with purpose, taking several quick steps into the small clearing. Then it stopped suddenly. So suddenly it was unnatural, like hitting pause on a video. Its head turned, not just its eyes, but its entire upper body pivoted in my direction. And it saw me. I know it saw me, because its posture changed instantly. It squared its shoulders toward me and went completely still, except for its chest rising and falling with those deep breaths. We stared at each other. 5 seconds? 10? It felt like forever. I couldn't move. I literally could not make my muscles respond. It was like sleep paralysis, that complete inability to do anything but watch. Then it made a sound I will never, ever forget. It wasn't a roar or a scream like you hear in movies. It was a low, rumbling growl that started deep in its chest and built in intensity, not like any animal I've ever heard. There was intelligence in that sound, intent. It wasn't just an animal warning me away. It was communicating something specific. The growl lasted maybe 3 seconds, and then it turned and moved back into the dense forest, not running, but moving with deliberate speed. The vegetation swayed and cracked as it retreated. I stayed frozen, listening as the sounds grew fainter, heading deeper into the woods, up toward the mountains. I don't know how long I sat there after it left. Maybe 5 minutes, maybe 30. I was in shock. When I finally managed to stand up, my legs nearly buckled. I realized I was drenched in sweat despite the cool night air. I know I should have run straight back to the cabins, but I did something incredibly stupid instead. I took out my phone and turned on the flashlight. Some part of my brain needed to verify what I'd seen, needed some kind of evidence. With shaking hands, I directed the light toward where the creature had been standing. The ground was covered in pine needles and fallen leaves, not mud, so I wasn't expecting footprints. But what I found was just as convincing. A pathway of disturbed vegetation, small saplings bent or broken, and caught on one broken branch, a tuft of hair. I stared at that hair for a long time. It was coarse and long, maybe 4 to 5 inches in length, not black bear fur, which is shorter and has a different texture. Not deer or elk, definitely not human. I should have taken it. I know that now. But in that moment, touching anything that creature had touched seemed impossible. The thought of putting that hair in my pocket made me physically ill. Instead, I finally did what I should have done immediately. I ran. Across the meadow, not caring about being seen, just needing to get back to lights and walls and other people. I nearly fell several times, my legs unsteady with adrenaline and fear. I burst into the office and locked the door behind me. I checked all the windows, drew all the blinds. Then I sat on my bed with all the lights on until morning. When the sun came up, I tried to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe it was a bear, maybe it was a person in camouflage hunting illegally. Maybe I'd fallen asleep on that log and dreamed the whole thing. But I knew, in that bone-deep way, you know things that are true even when you want them not to be. After the guests had breakfast and headed out for their day activities, I went to my parents. I tried to tell them what I'd seen, but I could tell from their faces they didn't believe me. My dad suggested maybe I'd seen a bear. My mom was worried I was working too hard, not getting enough sleep. Around noon, I hiked back to the spot. In daylight, with birds singing and the forest feeling normal again, I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it all. But the broken vegetation was still there. The path of disturbed underbrush leading away into the woods was real. The tuft of hair was gone. Maybe it fell off. Maybe an animal took it, or maybe it came back for it. I spent the rest of that day in a daze. I kept catching myself staring at the tree line, expecting to see something watching me. That night, I slept in my parents' cabin, making up some excuse about the office being too hot. We closed the resort for the season 3 weeks later, and I went back to my apartment in Seattle. I tried to forget what happened, to immerse myself in work and city life. But I couldn't stop researching, couldn't stop looking for answers. I've spent hours reading about Sasquatch sightings in Washington. Before that night, I would have laughed at people who claimed to have seen Bigfoot. I would have assumed they were attention seekers or mistook a bear for something else. Now I don't know what to think. The details match so many other reports. The height, the gait, the coloring, even that distinctive growl. The Cascade Mountains around Leavenworth have a history of sightings going back decades. Am I just another deluded person who saw something ordinary and transformed it into something extraordinary? But I know what I saw. It wasn't human, it wasn't a bear. It moved with purpose and intelligence. I haven't told many people. Those I have told react exactly how you'd expect. With concern, disbelief, sometimes mockery. Only one friend, a guy who's into outdoor survival and spends a lot of time in remote areas, seemed to take me seriously. He told me I'm not the first person he's known who's had an unexplainable encounter in the woods. I haven't been back to the resort since we closed it for the season. My parents went up in April to start getting it ready for summer, but I made an excuse about work. The truth is, I'm scared. Not just of seeing that thing again, but of not seeing it. Of spending every minute in those woods wondering if it's watching me. I don't know what I encountered that night. I don't know if there's a scientific explanation waiting to be discovered, or if there are things in this world we simply don't understand yet. All I know is that my perception of reality shifted that night in August, and I can't shift it back. I still can't sleep with the lights off. I still flinch at unexpected noises, and I still can't explain what I saw that night in Leavenworth. Story 5. I've been hunting elk in Olympic National Forest for over 20 years, And I've seen some crazy stuff out there. But what happened last season? I still can't wrap my head around it. I'm not the type to make up stories or exaggerate. Ask anyone who knows me. I'm about as straightforward as they come. This all went down during the 2023 elk season. Like I always do. I set up my blind about 4 weeks before opening day. It's a good spot I've been using for years. Dense forest that opens into a small meadow. Maybe 60 by 80 yards. Perfect place where the game trails converge. I know that area like the back of my hand. I spent a whole day getting everything just right. My blind is one of those pop-up camouflage ones. Nothing fancy, but it works. I staked it down real good, used branches and ferns around the base to blend it in even better, and made sure it was sealed up tight before I left. I didn't want any critters getting in there before I came back for opening day. When opening day finally rolled around, I was up at 3:30 a.m. like I always am. Had my coffee, loaded up my truck, and headed out while it was still pitch black. I always park about a mile from my spot and walk in, following the edge of the game trails. I'm careful about my scent and noise. That's just basic hunting, right? It was just starting to get light when I approached my blind. That's when I first noticed something was off. There was this smell. Not like a dead animal or a skunk, but something else. Something I hadn't smelled before, and I've smelled pretty much everything in those woods. It was musky and sharp, kind of like wet dog mixed with something sour, but that's not quite right either. Hard to describe, but unmistakable once you've smelled it. As I got closer to my blind, the smell got stronger. Way stronger. So strong it made my eyes water. That's when I noticed the zipper on my blind was ripped open, not just unzipped, ripped, like something had forced its way in. My heart started pounding. I'm not exactly a small guy, and I had my rifle, but something about this felt wrong, really wrong. I approached carefully, calling out, "Hello?" a couple times, thinking maybe another hunter had used my blind as shelter in a storm or something. No response. When I got to the blind and looked inside, I nearly gagged. The smell was overwhelming. Something had definitely been in there, and not just passing through. Whatever it was had been sleeping there. The foam pad I keep in there was crushed down in the middle, and there were these hairs everywhere. Coarse, long hairs, dark brownish black. My first thought was bear, but they didn't look quite right for bear hair. And the fleas. Jesus, the fleas. They were jumping all over the place. I've dealt with ticks and bugs before, but this was something else. There had to be hundreds of them all through the blind. My hunting day was shot. There was no way I could use the blind, and the smell was so strong in that area that no elk would come within half a mile. I was pissed, to be honest. I'd put in all that work, taken vacation days for this hunt, and now something had ruined it. I decided to at least collect some of the hair samples. I had some small plastic bags in my pack for keeping my hunting license dry, so I used those to gather up some of the hair. I figured maybe it was just a bear, and I'd be able to tell once I looked at them more closely. I took some pictures too, though they don't really show much, except the torn zipper and the mess inside. I spent the rest of that day trying to hunt from a different spot, but my head wasn't in it. I kept thinking about what could have done that to my blind. The zipper was heavy duty. It would take some serious force to rip it like that, and that smell, I couldn't get it out of my nose. That evening, I called my buddy Mike, who works as a wildlife biologist near Spokane. I've known him for years. We used to hunt together before he got busy with his job and family. I told him what happened and mentioned I had hair samples. He seemed interested right away and told me to bring them over the next day. I drove the 3 hours to his office the next morning. Mike looked at the hairs under his microscope, but seemed puzzled. "These aren't bear," he said immediately. "Not cougar, not wolf, not elk or deer. Nothing I can immediately identify." He called his daughter Jenny over. She's studying wildlife biology at Washington State University and was interning with him that semester. She took a look too and was equally stumped. They both said they'd need to run more tests. Mike asked me about the blind, how secure it was, where exactly I'd placed it. He asked if I'd seen any tracks or scat nearby. I hadn't checked thoroughly, to be honest. I was too freaked out by the whole thing. The fleas are interesting, Jenny said. Different animals carry different species of fleas. If we can identify these, it might help narrow down what was in your blind. They managed to collect a few of the fleas that were still in the bag with the hair samples. Mike said he'd send everything to a colleague at the university who specializes in mammal identification and parasites. I went back to the hunting area 3 days later. The smell was still there, though not as strong. I set up about a quarter-mile away from my ruined blind, hoping to salvage something from the season. But I didn't see a single elk that day, or the next. It was like they were avoiding the entire area. Out of curiosity, I went back to check on my blind. The smell hit me again as I approached. This time, I looked more carefully around the area. The ground was too hard and leaf-covered for clear tracks, but I did notice something odd. Several of the lower branches on the trees surrounding my blind had been broken. Not cut, but snapped. Some of them were a good 8 feet off the ground. Bears can stand tall and break branches, I know that. But something about this didn't feel like bear behavior. Bears tend to leave other signs: claw marks on trees, scat, torn up logs where they've been looking for grubs. There was none of that. I took some pictures of the broken branches and sent them to Mike. He called me that night. "Rob, we've got some interesting results," he said, sounding both excited and confused. "The hair doesn't match any known wildlife species in Washington. It's primate hair, but not human." "What does that mean?" I asked. "Escaped monkey or something?" It sounded ridiculous even as I said it. "No, not monkey," Mike said. "The follicle structure is more similar to great apes, but it doesn't exactly match anything in our reference collection. And the fleas, they're a species that's typically found on large mammals, but with some unusual characteristics. Jenny's professor is really interested in all this." I didn't know what to say. Mike wasn't the type to jump to crazy conclusions. He was a scientist, methodical and skeptical by nature. "The broken branches you sent pictures of," he continued, "are consistent with something tall moving through the area. Looking at the height and the way they're broken, whatever did this was big. Bigger than a bear." There was a pause before he said what we were both thinking. "Rob, have you ever considered the possibility of Sasquatch?" I laughed, but it came out hollow. "Come on, Mike. You're a scientist." "I am," he said seriously. "And as a scientist, I follow evidence. I'm not saying that's what this is, but I am saying we have physical evidence of something in those woods that doesn't match known species. Something large, strong enough to tear through your blind, with primate-like hair, and carrying a specific type of flea that's not typically found in that area." We talked for another hour. Mike wasn't claiming he'd found proof of Bigfoot, but he wasn't dismissing it either. He wanted to come out to the site with me, but he couldn't get away from work for at least 2 weeks. In the meantime, I went back to hunt 3 more times. Each time, that smell was there, though fainter as the days passed. I never saw what made it. I never got an elk either. They seemed to be avoiding the area completely. On my last trip out, about 2 weeks after finding my blind destroyed, I heard something I'd never heard before. It was just before dusk, and I was packing up to head back to my truck. From the direction of my ruined blind, maybe a quarter-mile away, came this sound. Not quite a howl, not quite a scream, something in between. It started low and rose in pitch, echoing through the trees. It lasted maybe 10 seconds. Every hair on my body stood up. Whatever made that sound, it wasn't a cougar, wasn't a bear, wasn't an elk or a wolf or anything I'd heard in 20 years of hunting those woods. It was something else entirely. I didn't stick around to find out what. I got out of there as fast as I could while still being quiet. The whole way back to my truck, I felt like I was being watched. Every snapping twig, every rustle in the bushes made me whip around, my rifle ready, but I never saw anything. Mike finally came out with me about a week after the season ended. The smell was almost gone by then, and there wasn't much to see. He took soil samples from inside and around my blind, and more pictures of the broken branches. He was scientific about the whole thing, documenting everything carefully. "I don't know what was here, Rob," he said finally, "but something was. Something big that doesn't fit our usual understanding of the wildlife in this area." It's been months now, and I still don't have answers. Mike's colleague at the university is still analyzing the samples. Jenny has made it something of a personal project, I hear, but so far, all they can tell me is what it wasn't. Not a bear, not a cougar, not any known species that should be in Olympic National Forest. I'm going back for the 2024 season. I've already picked a new spot, about 2 miles from the old one. I've ordered a trail camera too, something I've never bothered with before. Part of me hopes I don't see or smell anything unusual. But another part, wants to know what the hell was sleeping in my blind that day. I'm not saying it was Sasquatch. I'm just saying that something was in those woods that shouldn't have been there. Something that left behind hair that wildlife biologists can't identify. Something that screamed like nothing I've ever heard before. Something that made even the elk avoid that area. Whatever it was real. And it was there. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, I swear I can still smell that strange, musky odor, even miles away from where it all happened. Story 6. I've been putting this off for months. Every time I start typing, my hands get clammy and I close the laptop. But I need to get this out there. Maybe someone will have answers. Maybe I'm not the only one. I was stationed at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base outside Tucson for almost 6 years. In 2021, I got promoted to captain and was assigned to head up security for one of the restricted sectors on the eastern perimeter. Good career move, I thought. Higher clearance, more responsibility, better pay. What they don't tell you is that higher clearance means learning things you can't unlearn. My job was pretty straightforward. Monitor for unauthorized entry, keep an eye on surveillance, and document any unusual activity, especially anything in the air that shouldn't be there. The base has a lot of aerospace testing, so we're trained to record everything carefully. They drill the protocols into you until they become second nature. Report everything, document everything, say nothing to anyone without proper clearance. The night of March 14th, 2021 started like any other. Arizona nights get cold in early spring, and I remember pulling my jacket tighter as I walked the perimeter with Tech Sergeant Alvarez. We were checking the new surveillance equipment we'd installed earlier that week. Better cameras, upgraded motion sensors, the works. Standard stuff. Around 2:15 a.m., my radio crackled. It was Peterson, one of our night guards stationed at the eastern fence line. His voice was different, higher, tighter. "Captain, I need you at Checkpoint Delta, now, sir." I told Alvarez to finish the checks and headed out in one of our ATVs. The ride took about 7 minutes across the dark open desert. When I pulled up, I could see Peterson's flashlight beam dancing erratically across the sand. He was scanning frantically, and when my headlights hit him, I saw his face. I've seen plenty of scared people in my career, but this was different. Peterson was ghost white, sweating despite the cold. His hand was actually shaking so bad the light beam was jerking around. "What's going on?" I asked, killing the ATV engine. Peterson just pointed toward the ridge, about 300 yards beyond the fence. "I saw something out there moving." I grabbed my night vision gear from the ATV, standard PVS-14s, military issue. Nothing remarkable, but they do the job. Peterson kept rambling about movement and shadows while I adjusted the focus. "Probably coyotes," I said, trying to calm him down. "We get wildlife all the time." "No, sir, much bigger, like a person, but not." I scanned the area he was pointing to. At first, nothing, just rocks, scrub brush, the usual desert landscape. Then I caught movement, something shifting behind a large boulder. I adjusted my position, trying to get a better angle. That's when I saw it. About 200 yards out, partially hidden by a large mesquite, was something. My first thought was bear, but we don't get many bears this far into the desert. Then I thought maybe someone in a ghillie suit, but the proportions were all wrong. This thing was tall, estimating against the mesquite maybe 8 to 10 feet. It was covered in what looked like dark hair or fur, and it moved with this weird fluid motion that didn't seem right. It was hunched over, examining something on the ground. Every few seconds it would pick something up, look at it, then drop it. I couldn't make out facial features, but the silhouette showed broad shoulders, long arms, and a somewhat conical head. My training kicked in. I radioed the command center and reported exactly what I was seeing, using our classification codes for unidentified subjects. Within minutes, my secure phone buzzed. It was Colonel Hargrove, my direct superior. "Wilson, what exactly are you seeing?" His voice was oddly calm. I described it in detail: height, appearance, behavior. The whole time I kept my eyes locked on this thing through the night vision. It still hadn't noticed us. "Maintain visual contact. Do not approach. Do not engage. We're sending air support to your coordinates." I acknowledged and hung up. Peterson was breathing so hard, I worried he might hyperventilate. "Sir, what the fuck is that thing?" he whispered. "No idea, but we're staying right here until backup arrives." For the next 14 minutes, we watched this creature as it methodically searched the desert floor. Sometimes it would stand fully upright, and that's when the scale really hit me. It was massive. Nothing human moves like that, or stands that tall. Then we heard the helicopter. The distinctive thump-thump of rotor blades came from the east, and I saw our base's Black Hawk approaching with spotlight scanning. The creature heard it too. Its head snapped up, and for a brief, terrifying moment I swear it looked right at us. Even through the green haze of night vision, I felt a chill run through me. There was intelligence in that gaze, awareness. Then it moved. Holy shit, it moved fast. 1 second it was there, the next it was bounding on all fours toward the rocky outcrop about 100 yards away. The speed was unreal, like watching a nature documentary on fast forward. It disappeared behind the rocks before the helicopter spotlight could find it. The Black Hawk circled for almost an hour, but found nothing. By dawn, a ground team had been dispatched, and I went with them to the area where I'd seen the creature. There were unusual depressions in the sand, not quite footprints, more like something heavy had pressed down in several spots. We took photos, measurements, the works. By 0800 we were being debriefed in a secure room on base. That's when things got weird. Colonel Hargrove sat across from me, flipping through my report. 2 men in civilian clothes stood silently in the corner. No introductions were made. "Captain Wilson, this incident is classified Level 4, Hargrove said without looking up. Level 4 is serious, way above what a normal security breach would warrant. "What was that thing, sir?" I asked. He closed the folder. "We call them desert walkers. They've been observed on and around this base since the 1970s. I just stared at him. My mind was racing. The military had a classification for these things, had known about them for decades. They're biological entities, not connected to our aerial phenomena research. We monitor but do not engage. That's been the protocol since before my time." "Are they... what exactly are they?" I managed to ask. "That's not your concern, Captain. Your job is to document and report, not to speculate or investigate." One of the civilians stepped forward then. "You'll be heading up our enhanced monitoring program for these entities. We're deploying additional surveillance equipment in your sector. Your team will be expanded to include 2 specialists." And just like that, I was suddenly in charge of tracking monsters in the desert. The next few months were surreal. We set up hidden cameras at strategic points around the perimeter. We upgraded our thermal imaging capabilities. We established a pattern of nighttime surveillance rotations. and we saw them. Not every night, but often enough. By July 2021, we had documented 17 separate sightings, sometimes just one creature, sometimes groups of 2 or 3. We started recognizing individuals by their size and movement patterns. There was one massive one we called Goliath that stood easily 10 feet tall. There was another, slightly smaller one with a distinctive limping gait. And once, in late August, we observed what appeared to be a female with a juvenile. The footage we captured is incredible. I can't share it. It's all classified, and I value my freedom. But it clearly shows these beings moving through the desert, sometimes digging, sometimes examining rocks or plants. They seem to avoid our fence lines most of the time, but occasionally they test the boundaries. In September, we had a breakthrough. Major Thompson, who'd been stationed at the base for years before me, confided that the creatures sometimes used the tunnel systems that run under parts of the base. The base was built over some old mining operations, and there are sections that connect to natural cave systems in the nearby mountains. Thompson showed me classified video of one of the desert walkers moving through a tunnel junction about half a mile from my sector. That changed everything. We weren't just dealing with creatures that lived near the base, they were potentially accessing it from below. I brought in Specialist Martinez, who had extensive experience with the night vision monitoring. He had tracked these things for years and had compiled detailed observations. "They're intelligent," he told me one night as we sat in a blind about a mile from the fence. "They avoid cameras, avoid traps. They communicate somehow, though I've never heard vocalizations. And they're curious about us, but cautious." "Why hasn't the military captured one?" I asked. "Studied it properly?" Martinez laughed. "You think they haven't tried? These things disappear like smoke when they want to. And honestly, I think some higher-ups like having them around. Entertainment value, you know? Posts out here get boring." But I knew there was more to it than that. During a classified briefing in November, I pressed Colonel Hargrove on why the military kept the existence of these creatures secret from the public. "Think about it, Wilson," he said. "If people knew we had 10-foot hairy humanoids regularly breaching a high-security military installation, what would that say about our ability to maintain perimeter integrity? How many UFO nuts and cryptid hunters would be swarming the desert trying to get a glimpse? It's a security nightmare." He had a point, but I still felt the weight of this secret. These weren't just strange lights in the sky or unusual radar readings. These were biological entities, possibly a whole unknown species, living right under our noses. December 11th was the night everything escalated. I was doing a solo night patrol along the eastern ridge. We'd had reports of unusual activity the previous 3 nights, and I wanted to check it myself. I had my night vision, thermal imager, and a digital recorder, standard kit for these excursions. Around 01:30, I picked up movement about 400 yards out. Through thermal, I saw the distinct heat signature of one of the desert walkers. This one was medium-sized, probably about 8 feet tall, based on previous observations. It was moving deliberately toward our fence line. Unusual behavior. I radioed in my position and observation. Command acknowledged, but didn't send backup. Standard protocol was to observe from a distance. I settled in behind a large rock formation and kept the thermal trained on the creature. It approached to within about 100 yards of the fence, closer than I'd ever seen one come voluntarily. Then it did something that made my blood run cold. It stood fully upright, raised its head, and seemed to sniff the air. Then it looked directly at my position, not in my general direction, directly at me, like it knew exactly where I was hidden. The thermal showed its heat signature brightening around the head and chest, a physiological reaction of some kind. I was downwind, so it couldn't have smelled me. But somehow it knew I was there. What happened next still haunts me. The creature made a deliberate series of gestures, raising one arm, then the other, then pointing toward the fence. then toward the mountains to the east. The movements were too precise, too intentional to be random. It was communicating. I sat frozen, unsure what to do. My training said maintain observation, don't engage. But this was unprecedented. Before I could decide on a course of action, my radio crackled loudly with static. The creature's head snapped toward the sound. Then, with that same incredible speed I'd witnessed months earlier, it dropped to all fours and bolted, not away from the base, but parallel to the fence line, heading north. I radioed in what I'd seen and was ordered to return to base immediately. When I got back, I found the command center in controlled chaos. Multiple sensors along the northern perimeter had been triggered. Something had breached the fence. Security teams were dispatched, and I joined the second wave. When we reached the breach point, the first team was already there, examining a section of fence that had been, there's no other word for it, peeled back, not cut, not blown up. The metal links had been physically bent and twisted back, creating an opening about 5 feet wide. The ground showed multiple sets of large, unusual footprints heading into the base complex. We followed the trail to a maintenance shed near one of the older hangars. The door had been torn off its hinges. Inside, equipment was scattered everywhere. Several storage containers had been opened, their contents emptied onto the floor. As we secured the site, my flashlight beam caught something on the wall. Writing. Not English. Not any language I recognized. Symbols scratched into the metal wall panel with something sharp. They formed a pattern about 2 feet long, curves, lines, dots, arranged in what looked like deliberate sequences. Before I could photograph it, Colonel Hargrove arrived with a specialized team. We were ordered out, and the area was sealed off. I never saw what they found in there, but the next day, 3 additional security checkpoints were established around the base, and our surveillance protocols were completely overhauled. I was called into a classified briefing with people I'd never seen before, serious types in both military and civilian dress. They questioned me for hours about every detail of my encounters with the desert walkers. They were particularly interested in the gestures the creature had made toward me. Had I seen similar behaviors before? Had it tried to communicate in other ways? Did I feel it was threatening or curious? After that night, everything changed. Our orders regarding the desert walkers were updated. We were to maintain distance at all times. Any signs of approach or unusual behavior were to be reported immediately. Additional weaponry was issued to perimeter guards, including tranquilizer rifles I'd never seen before. The final straw came in February 2022. I was reviewing night footage from camera station 14 when I saw it. 3 desert walkers moving together about a mile from the base. 2 large ones, 1 smaller. They stopped in a small clearing and formed a circle. The thermal imagery showed them placing objects on the ground between them. They stayed there for nearly an hour, occasionally manipulating these objects. When they left, I took a team out at first light to the coordinates. What we found in that clearing still makes no sense to me. Arranged in a perfect circle were various items, pieces of metal, electronic components, what looked like circuit boards, and strangest of all, pages torn from technical manuals. Some were from aircraft maintenance guides, others I couldn't identify. In the center of the circle was a crude model made of twisted wire and small metal parts. It resembled, it looked like a spacecraft of some kind. I documented everything and reported it up the chain. Within hours, I was removed from the Desert Walker monitoring program. The official reason: rotation of personnel for security purposes. But I knew the truth. I'd seen too much. By April 2022, I was transferred to another base entirely. Before I left, Martinez pulled me aside. "They've been studying us as much as we've been studying them," he whispered, "and they're learning faster than we are." I don't know what's happening at Davis-Monthan now. I've tried to follow up through official channels, but hit classified roadblocks at every turn. Sometimes at night, I still wake up remembering that creature looking directly at me, making those deliberate gestures, communicating. It knew I was watching. It wanted me to see it. And whatever these desert walkers are, they're not just mindless animals roaming the desert. They're intelligent, they're organized, and they're interested in us and our technology. The military knows this, has known it for decades, and they're keeping it secret for reasons that go far beyond simple security concerns. I'm breaking about a dozen regulations by posting this, but people need to know. Something is out there in the Arizona desert. Something that watches us from the shadows. Something that's getting bolder. And I can't shake the feeling that those gestures the creature made toward me weren't random. It was trying to tell me something. A warning, maybe, or an invitation. I just wish I knew which. Story 7. I've been guiding people through wilderness areas for almost 25 years now. Started in my early 20s after spending my younger years as a timber faller up in Mendocino County. I've seen pretty much everything the California forests can throw at you. Black bears, mountain lions, you name it. I know what animals sound like when they move through the brush. I know their patterns, their behaviors. I pride myself on keeping a cool head. What happened last summer has shaken that confidence to its core. It was mid-July 2023, and I'd taken a few days off to do some solo camping. Needed to clear my head after a particularly demanding group tour. I chose a spot off Ore Springs Road, deep in Mendocino County, an area I knew well from my logging days. It's dense forest there, the kind where the trees grow so thick they block out most of the sunlight even during the day. I'd hiked about 3 miles off any marked trail, wanting complete solitude. My campsite was simple, just my one-person tent, a small fire pit I dug myself, and my gear. No cell service, no other people for miles. Just how I like it. Or used to like it anyway. The first day went perfectly. I hiked, gathered firewood, caught a couple fish from a nearby stream for dinner. As the sun went down, I built a small fire, cleaned my gear, and turned in around 11. The night was clear, warm enough that I left my tent flap partially open to catch any breeze. I fell asleep to the usual forest sounds, the distant hoot of an owl, insects buzzing, leaves rustling in the light wind. I was dead asleep when something woke me up. My watch read 2:28 a.m. when I checked it. At first, I wasn't sure what had pulled me from sleep, but then I heard it. About 50 yards away from my tent, something was moving through the underbrush. And not just moving, it was crashing through. Now, I've encountered black bears dozens of times. I've had them investigate my campsite, even had one stick its nose against my tent once. I know what a bear sounds like when it moves through the forest. This wasn't that. The sound was rhythmic. Crash, 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 like footsteps. Heavy, powerful footsteps. Whatever was making that noise was big, and it was breaking branches as it moved. Thick branches, the kind that make that sharp, violent snap when they break. Not the gentle cracking of twigs under a deer's hooves, or even the heavier sounds of a bear pushing through bushes. And the footsteps, they were bipedal. 2 feet, not 4. That's what made my blood run cold. 2 feet, moving fast, with a gait that was all wrong, too long of a stride, too powerful. I lay there frozen in my sleeping bag, not daring to move. My heart was hammering so hard, I was certain whatever was out there could hear it. I've never felt fear like that before. Pure, instinctual terror that bypassed all rational thought. My body knew something was wrong before my mind could process it. I wished I'd closed my tent flap completely. The small opening suddenly felt like a giant vulnerability, but I was too afraid to move to zip it shut. Instead, I just stared at that dark gap, half expecting to see something peer in at any moment. The crashing continued, moving parallel to my campsite, but not toward it. Thank God. Whatever it was seemed to be in a hurry, covering ground fast. Too fast for something that big. The forest floor in that area is covered with thick underbrush, madrone, manzanita, poison oak. It's not easy terrain to move through quickly. even for experienced hikers on established game trails. This thing was just plowing through everything in its path. Then I heard dogs barking, not just one dog, but several, and they sounded like they were in pursuit of whatever was crashing through the woods, which made no sense. I was miles from the nearest road, miles from any houses where pet dogs might be. These weren't coyotes or wolves. I know those sounds too. These were domesticated dogs, barking with that distinctive tone they get when they're chasing something. The crashing sounds changed direction slightly, moving away from my position, with the dog barks following. I started counting seconds in my head, trying to steady my breathing. After about 30 seconds, the crashing suddenly stopped. The forest went completely quiet, except for a few more barks from the dogs. Then I heard it, a sound that still gives me nightmares, a dog yelp that turned into a high-pitched scream, then abruptly cut off. It was the sound of an animal in severe pain, terrified and injured, then silence. Complete, absolute silence. No insects chirping, no leaves rustling, nothing. The silence was almost worse than the noise. In all my years in the wilderness, I've never experienced a forest go that silent, that suddenly. It was like everything was holding its breath. I don't know how long I lay there. Could have been minutes, could have been hours. Every muscle in my body was tense, ready to... I don't even know what. Fight? Run? Neither seemed like good options. I just stayed completely still, straining my ears for any sound, any indication of what was out there. Eventually, the normal forest sounds slowly returned. An owl hooted somewhere in the distance. The insects started up again. But I didn't sleep. Not for a second. I just lay there, watching that small opening in my tent, waiting for dawn. When the first light finally came, I packed up my camp faster than I ever have before. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely fold my tent. I left the ashes from my fire, something I never do, and practically jogged back to the trail and then to my truck. As I hiked out, I kept looking for signs of whatever had crashed through the forest. I'm an experienced tracker, and something that size moving that forcefully should have left obvious signs. Broken branches, disturbed ground, maybe even footprints. But I couldn't find anything. No trail of destruction, no blood from the injured dog, nothing. Just the usual forest floor undisturbed. That disturbed me almost as much as the sounds themselves. I've been trying to rationalize it ever since. Maybe it was a bear being chased by feral dogs. But bears don't move bipedally for that long, or that fast. A person running from dogs. But no human could make that much noise moving through dense brush. And why would someone be out there at 2:30 in the morning? Plus the footsteps were too heavy, the stride too long. The thing is, this wasn't my first weird experience in those woods. Back when I was working as a timber faller, I'd often get this feeling of being watched. It would come over me suddenly while I was working alone. Sometimes it got so intense I'd stop my chainsaw just to listen, sure that I'd hear someone or something approaching. But there was never anything there, just that overwhelming sensation of eyes on me. And the animals. Over my years working near Ukiah, I came across at least 7 or 8 animal carcasses that were wrong. Disemboweled deer mostly, with the rest of the carcass untouched. Not like a mountain lion kill, where they go for the throat and then eat the choice parts. These carcasses looked like something had just taken the organs and left everything else. No bite marks, no signs of feeding on the flesh. Just empty. The other loggers would joke about it, but nobody had a good explanation. I used to think those experiences were just part of being in the wilderness, the mind playing tricks, or natural phenomena I didn't fully understand. But after what I heard that night, I'm not so sure anymore. I haven't been back to camp alone since then. I still guide groups. That's my livelihood. But I make sure we stay in more popular areas, places where other campers are within shouting distance. And I always bring my dog now, a big German shepherd who sleeps in the tent with me. When I think about that night, what stands out most isn't even the sounds themselves. though those were terrifying enough. It's the absolute wrongness of it all. Everything about the situation felt unnatural. The movement pattern, the speed, the strength, the dogs appearing out of nowhere, then that awful silence. I've tried researching local legends from the area, talking to old-timers who've lived in Mendocino County their whole lives. Some mention stories of a creature in those woods, something the indigenous people warned about. Others talk about illegal marijuana grows and the dogs that guard them. But none of those explanations quite fit what I experienced. Sometimes I think about setting up cameras in that area, going back with a group of people to investigate. But honestly, I'm scared. For the first time in my adult life, I'm genuinely afraid of something in the forests I've always considered my second home. I don't know what was moving through those woods that night. I don't know what happened to those dogs. And maybe it's better that way. Some mysteries probably should remain unsolved. All I know is that something was out there, something that shouldn't have been. And sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night and my mind starts to wander, I can't help but wonder if it's still there, moving through the forests of Mendocino County when no one's watching. And I wonder if someday it might decide to come closer to the tent of another camper who, like me, thought they knew everything there was to know about what lives in those woods. Story 8. I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened last summer. It's been over a year, but I can't shake it. I've worked in logging for almost 15 years now, around Revelstoke, BC. We've seen some weird shit in the woods, bears acting strange, cougars getting too close to camp, but nothing that could explain what happened on Frisbee Ridge in July 2022. Our crew likes to blow off steam on weekends, so we often go hiking or fishing in the backcountry. There'd been rumors going around about unusual wildlife sightings in that area. At first, we figured it was just tourists mistaking bears for something else, or maybe some of the local hunters trying to scare people away from their favorite spots. But after what we experienced, I'm not so sure anymore. There were 12 of us that weekend. Me, my foreman Jake, and 10 other guys from the crew. We'd spent the day hiking, following some game trails and taking photos. Nothing unusual happened during the day. We set up camp around 4 p.m., just a basic setup with tents arranged in a rough circle and a fire pit in the middle. We'd picked a nice flat area with a good view, maybe half a kilometer from the edge of Frisbee Ridge. After dinner, around 9 p.m., we were sitting around the fire talking about plans for Sunday when we spotted a couple on horseback moving along a trail about 200 meters from our camp. They were headed north toward a small alpine lake we'd passed on our way in. I remember thinking it was kind of late for them to be heading that direction, but figured maybe they had a camp set up already. Jake waved at them, and the guy waved back, but they didn't stop to chat. We turned in around 11 p.m. I was sharing a tent with my buddy Mike, and I remember having trouble falling asleep because the night felt weirdly quiet. No crickets, no owls, nothing. I've spent hundreds of nights in the backcountry, and this silence was noticeable. I must have finally dozed off, because the next thing I knew, I was jerked awake by the sound of horses galloping through our camp. I heard shouts as some of the guys scrambled out of their tents. By the time I got out there, the horses were already disappearing into the trees. Their saddles were still on, but there were no riders. "What the hell?" Jake said, shining his flashlight after them. "Those are the same horses from earlier." We were all standing around in our underwear and t-shirts, trying to figure out what to do. It was around midnight, maybe a bit later. The horses were long gone, and we had no idea where the riders were. "Should we go look for them?" someone asked. Jake shook his head. "Too dangerous in the dark. We'll check at first light." We built the fire back up, and a few guys stayed awake to keep watch, while the rest of us tried to get some sleep. I had just started to drift off again when I heard it. A scream. Not just any scream, but something that made my blood turn to ice. It was loud, so goddamn loud, and it seemed to go on forever. high-pitched at first, then dropping to a guttural howl that no human throat could make. It wasn't a bear, wasn't a cougar, wasn't a wolf. I've heard all those animals, and this was something entirely different. Everyone was out of their tents in seconds. The screams came again, this time from a different direction. That's when I realized there was more than one of whatever was making those sounds. "What the fuck is that?" Mike whispered. His face looked pale in the firelight. Nobody answered. We all just stood there, frozen, as the screams echoed around us. They seemed to be coming from the direction the couple on horseback had gone. Jake, who's been a logger for over 20 years and knows these woods better than anyone, looked genuinely scared. "Get the fire bigger," he ordered, his voice tight. "Now!" We scrambled to throw more wood on, building it up until the flames were 5 feet high. The screaming had stopped, but that was almost worse than hearing it. The silence felt like it was pressing in on us from all sides. "Grab anything that could be used as a weapon," Jake said quietly. "Stay close to the fire." Some guys got their hatchets. Others found heavy branches or rocks. I had my hunting knife, though it seemed pathetically small against whatever was out there. We huddled around that fire for what felt like forever, jumping at every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves. Around 1 a.m., we heard heavy footsteps circling our camp, just beyond the reach of the firelight. The footfalls were deliberate, slow, like whatever it was wanted us to know it was there. Then came a smell that nearly made me gag, like rotting meat and wet dog combined. "It's trying to figure out how many of us there are," whispered Danny, one of the younger guys. A branch snapped loudly to our left, and we all whipped around to face that direction. For a split second, I thought I saw something, a massive, dark shape moving between the trees. It was tall, at least 7 or 8 feet, and bulky. Then it was gone. None of us slept that night. We kept the fire roaring and stayed together, backs to each other, facing outward. The footsteps and that awful smell came and went, but whatever was out there never showed itself clearly. The screams didn't come again, but a few times we heard what sounded like deep, rumbling growls. When the sky finally started to lighten around 5 a.m., I felt like I could breathe again. We waited until full daylight before venturing away from camp. "We need to find those people," Jake said. "They could be hurt." We split into groups of 4, each taking a different direction, but staying within shouting distance of each other. Me, Jake, Mike, and a guy named Chris headed north, toward the lake where we'd seen the couple going. About 1/2 kilometer from camp, Mike spotted the first track. "Holy shit," he breathed, crouching down to examine it. It was a footprint, at least it looked like one, but it was massive. I've been around bears my whole life, and this wasn't a bear print. It was clearly a foot with 5 toes, but it was easily 53 centimeters long and about 18 wide. The impression was deep too, like whatever made it was incredibly heavy. We found more tracks heading in the same direction. They were spaced far apart, suggesting whatever made them had a stride twice as long as mine. About 1 kilometer further on, we came to a small clearing and stopped dead in our tracks. There was a deer carcass on the ground, or what was left of it. The poor thing had been torn in half, literally torn, not cut or chewed. Only the head and front shoulders remained. The spine was twisted and snapped like it was nothing more than a twig. Blood and guts were splattered everywhere, and that same foul smell hung heavy in the air. Chris, who's an experienced hunter, examined the scene with his face screwed up in disgust. "Look at the tracks," he said, pointing. "It was an ambush. One of them waited behind that big Douglas fir, and the other drove the deer toward it." He was right. You could see where the deer had come running down a game trail and where something huge had lunged out from behind the tree. There were drag marks in the dirt and more of those massive footprints all around. "What the hell could do this?" Mike asked, his voice barely above a whisper. None of us had an answer. We photographed everything with our phones, though the pictures hardly captured how disturbing the scene was. Then we continued searching for the missing couple. We didn't find them, but around noon we got a call on our radio from the other search group saying they'd made contact with a park ranger who was already looking for the missing riders. Apparently the couple had managed to hike out to a main trail early that morning and flag down help. We regrouped at camp and packed up quickly. None of us wanted to spend another night there. On our way out, we ran into the ranger, a serious-looking woman named Peterson. She told us the couple was physically unhurt, but severely traumatized. They said they were attacked by two large, hairy creatures, she explained, looking uncomfortable even saying it. The horses threw them and bolted. They managed to hide among some rocks and spent the night there. Did they describe these creatures? Jake asked. The ranger hesitated. They said they were at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark hair, and smelled terrible. The man kept saying they weren't bears, that they walked on 2 legs and moved like humans, only faster. She told us she'd found the remains of both horses about 10 kilometers from our campsite, wedged into a rocky crevice, like they'd been stored there. That information made my skin crawl. We found tracks, I told her, showing her the photos on my phone, and a deer that was torn apart. She studied the pictures for a long time, her expression unreadable. Finally, she looked up at us. I need you to show me these locations, and I'd appreciate if you didn't share these photos or discuss this incident with anyone for now. We led her to the tracks in the deer carcass. She took samples, measurements, and her own photographs. The whole time she kept looking over her shoulder and checking her sidearm. What do you think it was? I finally asked her as we were leaving. She was quiet for so long, I thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she said, I've been a ranger in these mountains for 17 years. I've seen things I can't explain. This region has a history of unusual sightings. Sasquatch? Mike said, half joking, but nobody laughed. The ranger just gave him a long look. I'm not saying that, but whatever killed that deer wasn't a known predator. The tracks don't match any animal in our database. And the couple's description... She trailed off and shook her head. Let's get out of here before dark. We filed a report with the Forestry Service and the RCMP the next day. They took our statements but seemed skeptical. I could tell they thought we were exaggerating or had been drinking. Maybe we would have thought the same thing before that night. The logging company moved our operation to a different area after that, and none of us complained. I still work those woods, but I never go hiking on weekends anymore. And I definitely don't camp overnight. I can't explain what we encountered on Frisbee Ridge. I just know that when those screams tore through the night, something primal inside me recognized the sound as a predator, far up the food chain from humans. Whatever was out there watching us, circling our camp, it wasn't afraid of us or our fire. It was just calculating the odds. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night thinking I can hear those screams again, feeling like I'm being watched through my bedroom window. And on those nights, I wonder if whatever we encountered has been tracking us since we left those woods, just waiting for the right moment to finish what it started at Frisbee Ridge. Story 9. I've been holding this in for over 2 years now. I need to get it off my chest, but I've been scared to talk about it publicly. I signed some papers. I made promises. But the nightmares won't stop, and maybe writing this down will help. I work as a heavy equipment operator throughout British Columbia. Been doing it for almost 15 years now. Good money, and I get to be outdoors, which I've always loved. I'm an avid hunter too. Got all the decals on my truck to prove it. Deer, moose, bear. I've hunted them all legally and responsibly. Back in October 2021, I had a few days off and decided to do some hunting near Merritt, BC. I had special permission from the local forestry service to hunt in a restricted area. They give out a limited number of permits each season. It's a sweet deal because these areas don't get the hunting pressure that public lands do. The animals are bigger, more plentiful, and the hunting is just better overall. I'd been given a key to access a gated road that leads up toward Juniper Ridge. It was a Wednesday morning. Weather was perfect. Crisp fall air, about 5 degrees Celsius, clear skies. I left my place around 4:30 a.m., wanting to get to my spot by first light. The drive to the gate took about an hour and a half from my place. When I got there, something felt off immediately. There were fresh tire tracks everywhere, way more than there should have been for a restricted area. Still, I figured maybe there was some forestry work going on. So I unlocked the gate, drove through, then got out to lock it behind me as required. The road up toward Juniper Ridge is rough, all gravel and dirt with washouts and potholes that'll rattle your teeth loose if you're not careful. My F-250 handled it fine, but I was driving slow, scanning the forest edge for any movement. About 15 minutes up the road, I came to a bend that opens up to this small campground area. There's a clearing with some basic facilities, fire pits, an outhouse, and a large metal dumpster for campers' trash. The campground is usually closed this time of year, which makes the area even better for hunting. As I rounded that bend, my stomach dropped. There were vehicles everywhere, at least a dozen Ministry of Forest trucks, conservation officer SUVs, and even what looked like unmarked police vehicles. Men and women in uniforms were combing the area with what looked like search equipment. Some had dogs, others were taking photographs and measurements. I slowed down, thinking I should turn around, but before I could, 2 conservation officers approached my truck, hands on their sidearms. They signaled for me to stop and roll down my window. "Sir, this area is closed. How did you get past the gate?" the older officer asked. His name tag read Daniels. He looked dead serious, and I could see he was stressed, bags under his eyes like he hadn't slept. "I have permission to hunt here," I explained, reaching slowly for my glove compartment where I kept my permit. "I have a key and everything. The Forestry Service." "Step out of the vehicle, please," the younger officer cut me off. "Keep your hands where we can see them." I did as I was told. The second my boots hit the ground, I noticed something I hadn't seen from inside the truck. The large metal dumpster was lying on its side about 20 meters away. Not just tipped over, but crushed on one side like something had slammed into it with tremendous force. The contents were scattered everywhere, and men in what looked like hazmat suits were carefully collecting and bagging items. "Is my rifle in the vehicle?" Daniels asked. "Yes, sir. Behind the seat. Unloaded. Case closed," I replied. The younger officer checked, removed my Remington 308, and took it away. They escorted me to one of the larger trucks, where a man in plain clothes was sitting with a laptop. He didn't introduce himself, but started asking questions right away. Name, address, purpose for being in the area, who gave me permission, whether I'd been there before, if I'd seen anything unusual on the drive in. I answered everything truthfully, increasingly confused and concerned. The questioning went on for what felt like forever, but was probably about 2 hours. They took my phone, looked through my call history, photos, messages. One guy wrote down all my social media handles. They made copies of my driver's license, hunting license, and permit. Around mid-morning, a Forestry Service truck pulled up, and I recognized Tom Harrison, one of the local officials who had issued my permit. Relief washed over me. Tom talked with the plainclothes guy for a few minutes, occasionally looking over at me and nodding. Finally, he came over. "Hey, sorry about this," Tom said, his voice lowered. "You're good to go, but you need to leave the area immediately. We're canceling all permits for this region indefinitely." "What's going on, Tom?" I asked. "Did someone get hurt up here?" Tom glanced around nervously. "I can't discuss it. You need to sign some papers before you leave." The plainclothes man approached with a document. "This is a non-disclosure agreement. By signing, you agree not to discuss anything you've seen here today or speculate publicly about what might have happened. This is a matter of public safety and ongoing investigation." I skimmed the document. It was full of legal jargon, but the gist was clear. Keep my mouth shut or face serious consequences. They still had my rifle, and I just wanted to get out of there, so I signed. As Tom walked me back to my truck, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. At the edge of the clearing where the forest began, there was a section of trees that looked wrong, not cut down, but broken and snapped about 8-10 feet up the trunk. Several trees in a row, each at least 6 to 8 inches thick, broken like twigs. Between them was what looked like a path of destruction heading deeper into the forest. Yellow police tape cordoned off the entire area. "Tom," I whispered, nodding toward the damage. "What the hell did that?" Tom followed my gaze and quickly looked away. "Bear probably, big one. I've hunted bear for years. I've tracked them, studied them. No bear does damage like that, not even a grizzly." "They're giving me back my rifle?" I asked, changing the subject. "Yeah, but no ammo. You'll get that back when you're off the forestry road. Someone will follow you to make sure you leave." Before returning my rifle, they made me open my truck for a thorough search. As I waited, I overheard 2 conservation officers talking nearby. They were speaking quietly, but I caught fragments. Never seen anything like it. 3 of them torn apart. Bigger than the reports from Sasquatch Mountain last year. Had to call in the military specialists from Victoria. When they noticed me listening, they immediately stopped talking and moved away. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the autumn air. They finally gave me back my rifle, confirmed it was unloaded, and told me to leave immediately. As I got in my truck, I noticed something odd on the ground near where the dumpster had been overturned. A large, dark patch that people in those hazmat suits were covering with some kind of solution. Even from that distance, I could tell it was blood. A lot of blood. I started my truck and headed back down the road. In my rearview mirror, I could see a ministry vehicle following at a distance. As instructed, I stopped at the gate, where another officer was waiting. He returned my ammunition, watched me lock the gate, then stood there as I drove away. For weeks afterward, I checked the local news for any reports of accidents or incidents near Merritt. Nothing. I called a buddy who works for BC Parks to see if he'd heard anything. He hadn't, but promised to ask around. A few days later, he called back and told me to drop it. His exact words were, "Some things are better left alone, man. Trust me on this." I might have convinced myself I'd misunderstood or exaggerated what I'd seen, if not for what happened a few months later. I was working a job at a wind turbine installation project in the Okanagan Valley when I met this security guard named Michael. Nice guy. We got to talking during breaks. When he saw all the hunting decals on my truck, he asked if I'd ever seen anything strange in the woods. Mentioned he was interested in Sasquatch sightings. Normally, I'd laugh that kind of talk off. I've spent my whole life in the BC wilderness and never believed in that stuff, but after what I'd seen and heard near Merritt, I couldn't laugh anymore. I told him my story, expecting him to think I was crazy or making it up. Instead, he got really quiet and serious. He said he'd been collecting stories like mine for years. According to him, there had been increased activity and sightings throughout British Columbia, especially in more remote areas. He believed what I'd seen was evidence of a Sasquatch attack, and not the first one that had been covered up. I don't know if I believe that exactly, but I know what I saw. Those broken trees, that destroyed dumpster, the blood, the look on Tom's face when I asked what happened, the way those officers clammed up when they realized I was listening. Something happened in those woods. Something bad enough that multiple government agencies responded and then covered it up. Something powerful enough to snap trees and crush metal. Something that left enough blood on the ground that they needed people in hazmat suits to clean it up. I haven't been back to that area since. My hunting spots now are all in well-traveled public areas. I don't go into the deep woods alone anymore. I don't hunt at dawn or dusk. I keep my rifle loaded when I'm out there. Sometimes at night I wake up thinking I hear something moving outside my bedroom window. Something big, something that breathes heavily. On those nights, I lie perfectly still until morning, afraid to even look outside. I'm not saying it was Sasquatch. I'm not saying I believe in monsters. All I know is that something happened near Merritt in October 2021 that was bad enough to warrant an armed response, a cover-up, and a legally binding promise to keep quiet. Something happened that changed how I see the forests I've spent my whole life in. And sometimes, when I'm driving through remote areas for work, I scan the tree line more carefully than I used to. I look for broken branches, unusual movements, anything out of place, because whatever was in those woods that day is probably still out there, and I never want to encounter it face to face. I'm breaking my agreement by writing this. I could get in serious trouble. But people need to know there are things in the BC wilderness that defy explanation. Things the authorities don't want us talking about. Things they'll go to great lengths to keep quiet. If you're hunting or camping near Merritt, especially around Juniper Ridge, be careful. Be aware. And if you hear something big moving through the trees that doesn't sound like any animal you recognize, get out. Get out fast. I still don't know exactly what happened that day, but I know enough to be afraid, enough to warn others, because 3 people died in those woods. And whatever killed them was strong enough to break trees and overturn metal dumpsters like they were made of cardboard. And I think about that non-disclosure agreement I signed, about the consequences of breaking it. But I think more about what might happen if I don't speak up and someone else stumbles into something they're not prepared for. So there it is. My experience. Take it for what it's worth. I'm not asking you to believe in Sasquatch or monsters or government conspiracies. I'm just telling you what I saw and heard that October morning near Merritt. The rest is up to you. Story 10. Ma. I've been putting off writing this for almost 30 years now, but I think I need to get it off my chest. I still get goosebumps thinking about it, and honestly I don't care if anyone believes me or not. What happened that day in September changed how I see the woods forever. It was September 12th, 1992. I remember the date clear as day because it was the weekend after my boy Darryl Jr. started 3rd grade. We lived in Klamath, California back then. Small logging town surrounded by some of the densest forests you'll ever see. Junior was 8 at the time, always running around with his buddy Tommy from up the road. The two of them were obsessed with catching garter snakes that summer. Every weekend, same routine. They'd grab their little buckets and head down to the creek about a quarter mile behind our property. That Saturday started normal enough. My wife was visiting her sister in Crescent City, and I was fixing the back porch steps that had rotted through. Around 11:30, Junior and Tommy asked if they could go snake hunting. I told them to be back for lunch at 1:00, same as always. They tore off down the path toward the creek, all excited. I didn't think anything of it. They'd done this 100 times before. Not even 20 minutes later, I heard screaming. Not playing around screaming, but genuine terror. I dropped my hammer and ran toward the sound. Junior and Tommy came tearing up the path like the devil himself was chasing them. Junior was crying so hard he could barely breathe, and Tommy's face was white as a sheet. They were running so fast, they nearly knocked me over. It took a few minutes to calm them down enough to talk. Junior was shaking, actually shaking in my arms. Tommy kept looking back at the woods like something was going to come bursting out after them. "There's a big hairy man down there, Dad," Junior finally managed to say between sobs. A big hairy man. Now, my first thought was some homeless guy had scared them. We'd had issues with transients camping in the woods before, but the way these boys were acting, this was different. I asked them to tell me exactly what happened. They said they were poking around the creek bed looking for snakes when they heard branches breaking. Tommy said there was this awful smell, like rotten chicken, and when they looked up, they saw it. About 100 feet away, standing on the other side of the creek. "It was huge, Mr. Owens," Tommy kept saying. "It was shaking a branch in its hand, like it was trying to get our attention." What struck me was how they described it, not as Bigfoot or Sasquatch, or any of those names you'd expect kids to use if they were making up a story. They just kept calling it the big hairy man. They said it was covered in thick, dark brown hair, but they could see its face clearly. They only watched it for maybe 5 seconds before they ran, but Junior swore it turned and walked into the brush as they fled. I'm a practical man. Always have been. I worked at the lumber mill for 20 years, and I know those woods better than most. I've seen bears, mountain lions, all kinds of wildlife, but the terror in my son's eyes, that was real. I knew I had to go check it out. I grabbed my shotgun from the closet, not because I planned to shoot anything, but because you don't go into those woods unarmed, period. I told the boys to stay in the house with the doors locked while I went to investigate. Junior begged me not to go, which wasn't like him at all. The walk down to the creek seemed longer than usual that day. I kept my eyes and ears open, scanning the trees. It was dead quiet. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering. Anyone who spends time in the woods knows that's not right. When the forest goes silent, something's wrong. I reached the spot where the boys said they'd been looking for snakes. The creek was low that time of year, more of a trickle really, with a wide, sandy bank. I started looking around for signs of whoever or whatever had scared them. That's when I saw them. Footprints. But not human footprints, at least not like any I'd ever seen. They were enormous, sunk deep into the soft creek bed. I felt this cold wave wash over me, like someone had dumped ice water down my spine. These weren't bear tracks. They weren't from boots. They were feet, 5 toes, arch, heel, but massive. I stood there frozen, staring at those prints. My mind couldn't process what I was seeing. I'm 6'1", wear a size 12 boot, and these prints made mine look like a child's. I followed them with my eyes. They crossed the creek and disappeared into the dense brush on the other side. I'm not ashamed to admit I didn't stick around long. Something about those prints spooked me worse than anything I'd ever encountered in those woods. I headed back to the house at a pace that was just shy of running. When I got back, I didn't tell the boys what I'd found. I just said I didn't see anything unusual. Junior seemed relieved, but I could tell he knew I wasn't being straight with him. Kids can sense that stuff. That night, after Tommy went home and Junior was in bed, I called my buddy Steve, who worked for the Forest Service. I tried to sound casual, asking if there had been any unusual sightings in the area. He laughed and asked if I'd seen the tall man, which apparently was what some of the old-timers called it. I didn't admit anything, just listened. Steve said there were stories going back decades from loggers, hikers, and local Yurok tribe members. Most people kept quiet about their experiences because nobody wants to be labeled the town kook. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about those footprints washing away in the creek. I needed evidence, something concrete. So 3 days later, I went back with a bag of plaster of Paris I borrowed from the school's art teacher. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that the prints were probably gone, or that I'd somehow misinterpreted what I saw. But they were still there. Not all of them. The creek had risen slightly after some rain. But enough. I counted 34 distinct footprints zigzagging across the creek bed and up the opposite bank. I carefully made casts of the clearest ones. When I measured them later, they averaged 16.5 inches long and 8.5 inches wide. The stride between them was consistently around 56 inches. That's almost 5 feet between steps. While I was making those casts, I heard something. The brush on the steep hillside across the creek was thick, a wall of salal and huckleberry bushes, but something was moving through it. Not a deer or an elk. They make distinctive sounds. This was deliberate movement, pushing through the undergrowth, stopping, then moving again. Whatever it was big enough to shake small trees. I looked up from what I was doing, and that's when I saw it. Just for a moment, maybe 2 or 3 seconds, behind a gap in the bushes about 40 yards up the hillside, a face watching me. Not a human face, but not quite animal either. Deep-set eyes under a heavy brow, large nostrils close together. The face was a dark, burnt orange color, but the hair around it was flowing and lighter, almost reddish-brown. Our eyes met. I'm certain of it. And then it was gone. I left everything, the plaster, my backpack, all of it, and got out of there. I've never run so fast in my life. When I got home, I locked the doors and sat with my shotgun across my lap until my wife came home with Junior from his baseball practice. That night, around 9:30, we heard it for the first time. A scream from the canyon behind our house. Not a mountain lion. I've heard those plenty of times. This was something else entirely. It started low and built to this high-pitched howl that echoed across the canyon. My wife thought it was someone being murdered. Junior started crying and said, "That's the big hairy man, Dad. That's him." We heard those screams almost every night for weeks, always between 9 and 10 p.m. Sometimes there would be a call from one hilltop, then a response from another direction, like they were communicating. My wife wanted to call the sheriff, but I talked her out of it. What would we say? That Bigfoot was yelling in our backyard? I did eventually go back for the plaster casts. They weren't great quality. I'd rushed the job, but they were clear enough to show what they were. I still have them in a box in my garage. I've shown them to a few trusted friends over the years. Some laugh it off, others get real quiet and admit they've seen or heard strange things in those woods too. We moved away from Klamath a year later, partly because of a job offer in Oregon, but mostly because my wife couldn't stand those screams anymore. Junior had nightmares for months. He's 37 now with kids of his own, and to this day he won't go camping or hiking. Something changed in him after that day at the creek. I've spent nearly 3 decades trying to make sense of what happened. I've read books, watched documentaries, even attended a couple of those Bigfoot conventions. Some of the people in that community are, well, let's just say they're enthusiastic, but others are serious researchers, forestry workers, and ordinary folks like me who experience something they can't explain. I don't know what's out there in the forests of Northern California. I don't claim to, but I know what my son saw. I know what I saw, and I know those footprints were real. Whatever made them was walking on 2 legs and had feet shaped like ours, just much, much larger. The thing that still gets me, that I still can't shake after all these years, is the intelligence I saw in those eyes watching me from the hillside. There was awareness there. Whatever it was observing me, studying me, just as I was studying its tracks. That's what makes me lie awake some nights, even now. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, shaking branches and screaming across canyons in the dark. I wonder if other families have heard those sounds, or if kids playing by creeks have run home with stories about the big hairy man they saw in the woods. All I know is that my son and I saw something that day that wasn't supposed to exist, and nobody will ever convince me otherwise. Story 11. I've never been the type to believe in monsters or anything like that. Spent my whole life as a fisherman on the waters around Vancouver Island, and I've seen plenty of strange things out there. Weird jellyfish, the occasional seal that looks like something else in the fog, you name it. But what happened last summer, I still can't explain it, and it's changed how I look at the wilderness around here forever. It was July 2022, warm weather, clear skies. My wife Maggie and I were camping at this little spot near Qualicum Beach. Nothing fancy, just a small campground where we've been going for years. We had Margaret's brother Tom and his wife Sandra with us. Tom's a big guy like me. Between the two of us, we're pushing well over 220 kilos combined. We're not exactly lightweights. That day had been perfect. I'd spent most of it fishing along the shoreline, caught a few nice ones too. Nothing spectacular, but enough for a good dinner. As the sun started going down, we were all sitting at this wooden picnic table near our campsite, having a few beers, talking about nothing important. You know how it is when you're camping. The conversation just flows easier somehow. The sun was setting over the water, painting everything in these deep oranges and reds. The tide was coming in, waves gently lapping at the shore. It was peaceful, perfect even. That's what makes what happened next so damn unsettling. Maggie suddenly stopped mid-sentence and pointed toward the access road that runs parallel to the beach. "Gordon, what's that?" she asked, her voice quiet but urgent. I turned to look where she was pointing, and at first I didn't see anything unusual. Then I spotted movement, something big moving between the trees, heading straight for the shoreline. My first thought was it might be a bear, though that would be unusual for this area in the evening. "Tom, you seeing this?" I asked, nudging my brother-in-law. By now, all four of us were staring in the same direction. The figure emerged from the tree line and started crossing the open ground toward the water. That's when I realized this was no bear. This thing was walking upright, walking like a person, but not a person, not even close. The best way I can describe it is this. Imagine the biggest, tallest, most solid human you've ever seen. Now make them even bigger, covered in dark hair, and moving with this strange, purposeful gait that was somehow both awkward and graceful at the same time. "Jesus Christ," Tom whispered beside me. "That thing's huge." He wasn't exaggerating. I've been around enough to gauge size pretty accurately, and this creature had to be at least 2 meters tall, probably taller. And the mass of it, I'd put it well over 250 kilos, maybe even 300. Remember I mentioned Tom and I together are over 220 kilos. This thing made us look small by comparison. We all just sat there, frozen in place. I don't think any of us were breathing. The strangest part was that I wasn't exactly scared. More like my brain couldn't process what my eyes were seeing. It didn't seem threatening, just impossible. The sun was setting fast now, but there was still enough light to see the creature clearly as it walked straight down to the water's edge. Its movements were deliberate, like it had a specific destination in mind. The hair covering it was dark, deep brown or black. It was hard to tell in the fading light. It hung in matted clumps from its shoulders and back. None of us said a word. We just watched as this massive figure reached the shoreline. I expected it to stop there, maybe look around, but it didn't. Without hesitation, it walked straight into the ocean. Not wading in carefully like a person would, it just marched right in, the water rising up its legs, then to its waist, then chest. And then, as the four of us sat there with our jaws practically on the table, it disappeared beneath the surface of the water. Just went under and didn't come back up. The silence after it vanished was deafening. For what felt like minutes, none of us spoke. Finally, Tom let out a long breath. "Did you all just see that? Tell me you all just saw that." We had. All four of us had seen the same thing. "What the hell was it?" Sandra asked, her voice shaking slightly. I didn't have an answer. After 50 years on and around these waters, I thought I'd seen everything Vancouver Island had to offer. But this was something else entirely. "We need to go look," I said, finally standing up. My legs felt wobbly, not from fear exactly, but from the sheer impossibility of what we'd witnessed. "Are you crazy?" Maggie grabbed my arm. "What if it comes back out?" "It's been underwater for several minutes now," I pointed out. "Either it's gone somewhere or—" I didn't finish the thought. The idea of that massive body floating just offshore wasn't something I wanted to contemplate. Tom stood up next to me. "I'll go with you. Got your flashlight?" I nodded. I always keep a powerful LED flashlight in my tackle box, the kind that can light up a good 100 meters of water when you're night fishing. We grabbed it and headed down to the shore, the women following a few paces behind. The beach was deserted. Most of the other campers were back at their sites, preparing dinner or sitting around campfires. The sun had almost completely set now, just a sliver of orange on the horizon. I switched on my flashlight and swept the beam across the water. Nothing but gentle waves. Then Tom pointed at the sand. "Gordon, look at this!" The flashlight beam illuminated what he was pointing at. Footprints, enormous footprints, leading directly into the water. I've worn size 12 boots my whole adult life, and these prints dwarfed mine. They had to be at least 50 centimeters long, with 5 distinct toes clearly visible in the wet sand. The width was astonishing too. wider than my foot by a good margin. Sandra knelt down beside one of the prints. "This isn't possible," she whispered, running her fingers along the edge of the impression. "What kind of animal walks on two legs and has feet like this?" We all knew the answer, but nobody wanted to say it out loud. That would make it real. I followed the tracks with my flashlight beam, watching as they disappeared into the rising tide. The incoming water was already beginning to wash away the prints closest to the ocean. "There's nothing out there," Maggie said, staring at the dark water. "No splash, no movement, nothing." She was right. Whatever this thing was, it had either swum away underwater or... I don't know. I've been on the water my whole life, and I've never known anything that large that could stay submerged for so long. We stood there for probably 20 minutes, scanning the water, examining the footprints, trying to make sense of what we'd seen. Eventually, a chill set in as the temperature dropped, and we headed back to our campsite. That night, none of us slept well. Every sound from the forest or the beach had us wide awake, listening. But nothing came back from the ocean. By morning, the tide had erased all evidence of the footprints. Over breakfast, we talked it through again. In the light of day, it would have been easy to dismiss what we'd seen as a shared hallucination or a misidentification. But 4 people don't hallucinate the same thing, and all of us had seen it too clearly to have been mistaken. "I think it was a Sasquatch," Tom finally said, voicing what we'd all been thinking but reluctant to say. "A Bigfoot, whatever you want to call it." "Bigfoot doesn't swim in the ocean," Sandra objected. "That's not part of any story I've ever heard." But that's exactly what we'd seen. A massive, hair-covered humanoid creature walking deliberately into the ocean and disappearing beneath the waves. The rest of our camping trip passed without incident, but there was a tension that hadn't been there before. We found ourselves scanning the tree line more often, staying closer to the campsite, turning in earlier. The wilderness that had always felt like home to me suddenly felt different, like I'd been allowed a glimpse behind a curtain I wasn't supposed to see behind. When we got home, I started researching. I've never been one for computers, but I spent hours reading about Sasquatch sightings on Vancouver Island and the surrounding areas. There are plenty of stories, going back decades, centuries, even if you count the indigenous accounts, but I couldn't find a single report of one going into the ocean. Walking along beaches, yes. Swimming in lakes or rivers occasionally. But deliberately walking into the sea and disappearing, nothing. That's what troubles me the most about what we saw. If it was a Sasquatch, and I don't know what else it could have been, then it suggests these creatures have behaviors that aren't documented, that we know even less about them than we thought. The idea that they might be moving through the coastal waters, swimming from one part of the island to another, or even to the mainland. It changes everything about their potential range and territory. It's been almost a year now since that evening, and I still think about it almost daily. I've gone back to that same campground twice, alone, just sitting and watching the water and the tree line from dawn until dusk. Nothing unusual either time. Maggie and I have talked about whether to report what we saw to anyone official. But what would we say? We have no photos, no video, no physical evidence. Just the account of 4 seniors who saw something impossible walk into the ocean and disappear. I've been retired from commercial fishing for 7 years now, but I still take my little boat out several times a week. These days, I find myself scanning the shoreline differently, wondering if there are eyes watching from the trees. And sometimes, when I'm out on the water alone, I'll cut the engine and just drift, watching the surface for any sign of something large moving beneath. The ocean has always been mysterious. That's part of why I loved my job all those years. But now, I wonder what else might be moving through those waters that we've never accounted for. What other impossible things might be just beyond our understanding. I don't know if I'll ever see another one. Part of me hopes I do. Just to confirm that first sighting wasn't some mass delusion, part of me hopes I never do. But I do know this. I'll never look at the meeting point of forest and ocean the same way again. And when we go camping now, I make sure our site is a good distance from the shoreline. Some mysteries are better left unexplored. But once you've seen something like that with your own eyes, you can't unsee it. You can't unfeel the certainty that the world is stranger and more complex than most people ever realize. And sometimes that knowledge keeps me awake at night, wondering what else might be out there, moving silently between land and sea, just beyond the reach of our understanding. Story 12. I still get goosebumps when I think about what happened that summer. It was 1983, and I was 16. My cousins Mark and Jimmy were visiting for a couple weeks. They were 15 and 17, and we were all into the outdoor stuff back then. We'd been planning this camping trip for days, just us boys out in the woods near Castor Creek. It's this spot, about 4.5 miles west of New Llano, Louisiana, right off Highway 1211. The locals called it Sam's Old Bottom, just a quiet patch of woods where we figured we'd catch some catfish and mess around like teenagers do. My dad dropped us off around 1 that afternoon. It was hot as hell, typical Louisiana summer, and we were sweating buckets as we hauled our gear from the road down to the spot we'd picked near the creek. We had this old canvas tent my dad had used in the army, our sleeping bags, a cooler full of Cokes and sandwiches my mom had made, and all our fishing gear. Jimmy had this new buck knife his dad had given him for his birthday, and he kept showing it off, talking about how he could handle anything in these woods with it. Man, we had no idea. We spent most of the afternoon setting up camp and putting trot lines in the creek. If you're not familiar, trot lines are these long fishing lines with multiple hooks that you set up and check later. Good way to catch catfish while you're doing other stuff. Mark and I gathered firewood while Jimmy cleared a spot for the tent. We were all talking trash to each other, cousin stuff. Who could catch the biggest fish? Who was scared of the dark? That kind of thing. Around 6 we fired up the little propane stove and heated up the cans of Dinty Moore stew we'd brought. Nothing fancy, but man, it tasted good out there. We sat around on logs we'd dragged over, eating and talking about girls from school and bands we liked. Jimmy was into Metallica, I was more of a Van Halen guy. Normal stuff. The sun started going down around 8 hours, and the woods got real quiet except for the crickets and frogs down by the creek. We decided to check our trot lines around 9 tours. We grabbed our flashlights and headed down to the water's edge. The beam from my light caught the glassy surface of the creek, and for a second I thought I saw something move on the opposite bank. Just a flash of movement, then nothing. I figured it was probably a deer or maybe a raccoon. "Y'all see that?" I asked. "See what?" Mark said, shining his light across the water. "Nothing, I guess. Just some animal." We checked the lines and had caught 3 decent-sized catfish. Not bad for a few hours. Jimmy cleaned them with his new knife, acting all expert-like, even though I could tell he was struggling. We decided to save them for breakfast and headed back to the campsite. By 10:30 we were all in our sleeping bags. The tent was kind of small for 3 teenage boys, so we were pretty cramped in there. I was on the left side, Mark in the middle, and Jimmy on the right. We talked for a while, our voices getting quieter as we got sleepier. The last thing I remember before falling asleep was Jimmy saying something about hearing coyotes in the distance. I don't know exactly what time it was when Mark started shaking me. I just remember suddenly being awake and hearing him whisper, shouting, "Rob, Rob, there's something out there." I was groggy at first, thinking he was just trying to scare me. But then I heard it too. Heavy footsteps, way too heavy to be a deer, moving around outside the tent. There was a smell, too, something I'd never smelled before. Kind of musky, like wet dog, but stronger, with this weird sour note to it. "What is that?" I whispered. Jimmy was awake now, too, and he had his flashlight in his hand. "I'm gonna see," he said, reaching for the tent flap. "Don't!" Mark hissed, but Jimmy was already unzipping it. The beam from Jimmy's flashlight cut through the darkness, and that's when I saw it. standing at the edge of our camp, maybe 15 feet away, was... I still don't know how to describe it properly. It was like a man, but it wasn't a man. It was massive, at least 7 feet tall, with a body covered in hair. Not fur like a bear, but hair. Long, stringy hair that hung down from its arms, which were way too long for its body. They hung down past its waist. The thing was just standing there, watching us. I couldn't make out the color of the hair in the dark, but I could see the outline of its huge body against the trees behind it. Its shoulders were incredibly broad, and its head sat directly on those shoulders, hardly any neck at all. For what felt like forever but was probably only a few seconds, nobody moved. Not us, not it. Then Mark let out this sound, not quite a scream, more like a whimper, and the thing's head turned slightly, focusing on him. "Don't move," I whispered, barely making any sound at all. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. My mouth was completely dry, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. The creature still didn't move. It just stood there, watching us with eyes I couldn't really see but could feel. I had this overwhelming sense that it was curious about us, not necessarily wanting to hurt us, but I also knew, deep in my gut, that if we made any sudden movements or tried to threaten it, that would change in an instant. Jimmy's hand was shaking so bad, the flashlight beam was dancing all over the place. The creature flinched slightly when the light passed over its face, and I caught a glimpse of dark, deep-set eyes reflecting the light. Not red or glowing like in the movies, just dark, intelligent eyes in a face that was somewhere between human and ape. "What the hell is that thing?" Mark whispered, his voice trembling. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My entire body was frozen in fear. We stayed like that for what must have been 3 or 4 minutes, but felt like hours. The creature and us, locked in this bizarre standoff in the middle of the Louisiana woods. I noticed its chest moving slowly up and down as it breathed. It was real. This wasn't a dream or a shadow or our imaginations. This thing, whatever it was alive and standing right in front of us. Finally, after what seemed like forever, the creature moved. It slowly turned its massive body away from us, its long arms swinging slightly. Then it simply walked away into the darkness, moving with this strange, fluid gait that didn't seem quite human. The foliage at the edge of our campsite rustled as it pushed through, and then it was gone. None of us spoke for a long time. I could hear Mark breathing fast, almost hyperventilating. Jimmy had dropped the flashlight, and it was pointing at the tent floor, creating this eerie upward glow on our faces. Was that what I think it was?" Jimmy finally said. "I don't know what it was," I replied, but I did know. We all did. We'd just seen a Bigfoot. There was no other explanation that made sense. It wasn't a bear walking upright or a man in a costume or any of the rational things my mind tried to come up with in the following moments. "I want to go home," Mark said, his voice small and childlike. "We can't leave now," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "It's the middle of the night. We don't even know which way it went." Jimmy picked up the flashlight again and pointed it at the tent opening. "I think we should zip this up," he said, his hands still shaking as he pulled the zipper closed. None of us slept after that. We sat in that tent, backs against each other, jumping at every sound outside. The crickets and frogs had gone silent, and the woods felt unnaturally quiet. Once, around 3:00 a.m., according to Jimmy's digital watch, we heard heavy footsteps again, further away this time, moving parallel to the creek. We held our breath until the sound faded. As soon as the first grey light of dawn appeared, we started packing. We didn't speak much, just moved with this urgent, silent agreement to get the hell out of there. We left the trot lines in the creek. We didn't even bother with breakfast or cleaning up the campsite properly. We just stuffed everything into our backpacks, grabbed the cooler, and started walking fast toward the road. About halfway there, Jimmy suddenly stopped. "Guys," he said, pointing to the ground. There in the soft earth was a footprint. Not a human footprint, not a bear print. Something else. It was huge, easily 15 inches long, with 5 distinct toes. The impression was deep, suggesting whatever made it was heavy. We stood there staring at it. This physical proof that we hadn't imagined what we'd seen. "We should take a picture," Mark said. "With what?" I replied. None of us had cameras. This was 1983. No cell phones with cameras, no digital anything. Just 3 scared teenagers looking at evidence of something that wasn't supposed to exist. We made it to the road around 7:30 a.m. and walked to a gas station about a mile away. The old guy behind the counter looked at us funny when we came in, all pale-faced and jumpy. "Y'all look like you seen a ghost," he said, as Jimmy used the payphone to call his dad to come get us. We didn't tell him what we'd seen. We didn't tell anyone for a long time. Who would believe 3 teenage boys claiming they saw Bigfoot in the Louisiana woods? They'd think we were making it up for attention or that we'd been smoking something we shouldn't have been. But here's the thing. I know what I saw that night. I've gone over it in my head thousands of times in the years since. I've tried to convince myself it was a bear or a man or a product of teenage imagination and the dark woods. But it wasn't any of those things. I went back to Castor Creek several times over the next few years, never alone, always with friends, and never to spend the night. I told them I just wanted to fish, but really, I was looking for another glimpse, another footprint, something to confirm what I already knew. I never saw the creature again, but sometimes, standing by that creek, I'd get this feeling like I was being watched from the dense trees across the water. I'm 56 years old now. I've got kids of my own, a mortgage, a job with the state, normal life stuff. But not a single day goes by that I don't think about what happened at Sam's old bottom in the summer of 1983. I went from someone who laughed at the idea of Bigfoot to someone who knows, not believes, knows, that there are things in this world that science hasn't explained yet. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, that same creature, watching other campers from the edge of the darkness. I wonder if it remembers the 3 scared boys in the tent who didn't try to hurt it or run from it. I wonder if anyone else has seen it and, like us, decided to keep quiet about it. I don't expect anyone to believe this story. I probably wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't lived it. But it happened, exactly as I've described it. And sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night and hear a heavy footstep on my front porch, or catch a strange scent on the breeze when I'm out in my backyard, a part of me freezes, just for a second, and I'm 16 again, staring into the face of something that shouldn't exist, but does. Story 13. I've kept this to myself for over 40 years now. I don't know why I'm finally putting it out there, except that I'm getting older and I think someone should know. Back in July 1980, I experienced something that changed how I see the world forever, and only 2 other people on this planet know about it. I was 12 years old that summer. My dad was military, Army, and we were stationed at Fort Polk in Louisiana. If you've never been to western Louisiana, it's nothing but pine forests, humidity that feels like you're breathing through a wet towel, and more mosquitoes than should be legal. For a kid, though, those woods were everything. That summer was brutal hot, even by Louisiana standards. My 2 friends, I'll call them Jeff and Tommy, and I were bored out of our minds. We lived in base housing, which meant identical houses, identical yards, and parents who worked identical schedules. When you're 12, that's basically prison. One Tuesday morning, we decided to go exploring in the deep woods off Highway 28. We'd been to the edges before, but never too far in. Our parents had strict rules about where we could go, and the deep woods were definitely off limits. But when you're 12, rules are more like suggestions. We packed our backpacks with the essentials, a couple of warm Cokes, some Twinkies, Jeff's pocket knife that his grandpa gave him, and a cheap compass I got from a cereal box. Tommy brought a disposable camera, though he wasted most of the film taking stupid pictures of us making faces before we even hit the tree line. We left around 9:30 that morning, telling our mothers we were just going to Tommy's house to read comics. That bought us until dinner time, which meant we had about 8 hours of freedom. The woods near the highway started out pretty normal, the kind of place where you'd sometimes find beer cans and cigarette butts from teenagers. But we kept going, pushing farther than we'd ever gone before. The temperature dropped a few degrees once we got under the thick canopy, which was a relief from the Louisiana summer heat. Looking back, I realize how stupid we were. No real provisions. No one knew where we were, and we had no real survival skills beyond what we'd seen on TV. But we felt invincible, like most kids do. After walking for what must have been 2 hours, the woods changed. The undergrowth got thicker, the trees taller, and the sounds different. The usual background noise of cars from the highway had completely disappeared. All we could hear were birds, bugs, and the occasional rustle in the bushes that we convinced ourselves was just a squirrel or rabbit. I remember checking my compass and realizing we'd been heading almost due east the whole time. Jeff was starting to get nervous, saying we should mark our trail somehow, but Tommy and I just laughed it off. We were having an adventure. Around noon, we stopped to eat our Twinkies and drink our now hot Cokes. The humidity had plastered our t-shirts to our backs, and we were all sweating like crazy. Tommy kept complaining about the mosquitoes, which seemed to love him more than Jeff or me. "Let's go a little farther," I said. "Just to that ridge over there. Then we can head back." The ridge wasn't too far, maybe another 15 minutes of walking. When we reached it, we discovered it overlooked a small stream about 8 feet across. We were standing about 5 feet above the water on a small embankment. The water looked cool and clear, and for a second I thought about scrambling down to splash some on my face. That's when I saw them. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. On the opposite bank, 2 figures were crouched down by the water. They were drinking, using their hands to scoop water to their mouths. I froze. Beside me, I felt Tommy and Jeff go rigid too. No one spoke. No one moved. They looked almost human, but not quite. Both were completely covered in dark hair, a brownish-grey color that seemed to blend with the forest around them. Their faces had less hair, showing skin that was lighter, almost a pale tan color. The hair on their heads was long, hanging past their shoulders with distinct streaks of grey running through it. The rest of their bodies had shorter hair, but it covered them completely. One was clearly bigger than the other. The larger one, I'm certain it was female, had a softer face and what I can only describe as a more feminine body shape, even through all that hair. The smaller one looked like a younger version, a child or teenager maybe. A boy, I think, though I couldn't tell you exactly how I knew that. They hadn't noticed us yet. They were focused on drinking, occasionally looking around, but not up at our ridge. I remember thinking how quiet they were. Even drinking from the stream, they barely made a sound. Then Tommy shifted his weight, and a small rock tumbled down the embankment. Both creatures' heads snapped up immediately, looking directly at us. Their eyes, God, their eyes were so human-like. Dark, intelligent, and filled with the same surprise and fear that I'm sure was in ours. For about 30 seconds, though it felt like hours, we just stared at each other. No one moved. I couldn't even breathe. I remember noticing details. How the larger one's hand was gripping the smaller one's shoulder, how their chests rose and fell with rapid breathing, how the juvenile kept glancing at the adult as if waiting for instructions. Then the adult made a gesture with her hand, a clear signal to the younger one. It wasn't random, it was deliberate communication. She motioned with her palm down and then to the side, almost like saying, "Stay low and move away." The juvenile immediately responded, and they both turned and ran into the woods on their side of the stream. What struck me most was how silently they moved. These weren't small creatures. The adult must have been over 7 feet tall, but they disappeared into the woods without making any noise that we could hear. No branches breaking, no undergrowth rustling. They just vanished. We stood there for maybe 5 more seconds before Tommy whispered, "Run." And we did. We turned and ran as fast as we could back the way we came. I don't remember much about that panicked flight through the woods. I know I fell at least twice. My jeans tore at the knee, and I scraped my hand on something. Jeff lost his backpack somewhere, but none of us was going back for it. We didn't stop running until we reached the edge of the woods, near the highway. By then, we were all gasping for breath, our legs shaking, and our clothes soaked with sweat. Tommy threw up in the bushes. Jeff was crying, though he tried to hide it. Once we caught our breath, we looked at each other, and I knew we were all thinking the same thing. What do we do now? Who do we tell? "We can't tell anyone," Jeff said, wiping his face. "They'll know we went into the deep woods. We'll be grounded forever." "Who would believe us anyway?" Tommy added. "They'd just think we made it up." I nodded, even though part of me wanted to run straight to my dad and tell him everything. But Jeff was right. We'd broken a major rule by going so far into the woods alone. Plus, my dad wasn't exactly the type to believe in monsters or unexplained creatures. He was military through and through. Facts, evidence, and logical explanations were his currency. So we made a pact right there, standing at the edge of the woods with shaking legs and racing hearts. We wouldn't tell anyone, not our parents, not our friends, not anyone. "What were they?" Tommy finally asked as we walked back toward the base. "Bigfoot," I said. The word felt strange coming out of my mouth. Before that day, Bigfoot was just something from TV shows or tabloid newspapers my mom sometimes bought at the checkout line. Sasquatch. "There were 2 of them," Jeff said. "A mom and a kid, I think." We all agreed on that detail. It was unmistakable. We had seen a mother and child. By the time we got back to base housing, it was almost dinner time. We split up at the corner, each heading to our own homes. My mom asked about the tear in my jeans and the scrape on my hand. I told her I fell while playing basketball at Tommy's house. She believed me. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those creatures staring at us. Their eyes haunted me, so expressive, so aware. They had been just as scared of us as we were of them. The next day, the 3 of us met up, but barely talked about what happened. It was almost like if we didn't discuss it, we could pretend it never happened. By the end of the week, we had silently agreed to never bring it up again. A month later, my dad got transferred to Fort Hood in Texas. I lost touch with Tommy and Jeff over the years. This was before the internet, before cell phones made staying connected easy. For all I know, they never told anyone either. I'm 54 years old now. I've had a normal life, college, marriage, kids, career. But not a single day has passed that I don't think about what I saw in those Louisiana woods. Sometimes I wonder if Jeff or Tommy ever broke our pact and told someone. I wonder if anyone else has ever seen that mother and child, or if they're even still alive. What bothers me most is not knowing. Did we stumble upon something science hasn't acknowledged yet? Were they some kind of undiscovered primate, or was it something else entirely? The way that mother communicated with her child, that deliberate hand gesture, showed intelligence and family bonds that I still can't fully explain. I've watched every documentary, read every article I could find about Bigfoot sightings. Most seem like obvious hoaxes or misidentifications, but a few, a very few, sound eerily similar to what we experienced. Those are the ones that make the hair on my arms stand up, that make me feel like maybe I'm not crazy after all. I've thought about reporting it to one of those Bigfoot research groups, but what's the point after all these years? I have no evidence, no photos. Tommy's camera was in Jeff's backpack that got lost, and a story that sounds made up even to my own ears sometimes. But I know what I saw. I know those creatures were real. The fear in their eyes was real. The way they moved was real. The silent communication between mother and child was real. Sometimes I think about going back to those woods, trying to find that same stream. But Fort Polk has changed over the decades, and I'm not even sure I could find the right area anymore. Plus, what would be the point? The chances of seeing them again would be virtually zero. So I've kept this to myself all these years. My wife knows I have an interest in Bigfoot stories, but she thinks it's just a quirky hobby. My kids used to tease me about it when they were teenagers. None of them know the truth, that their father once stood 5 feet away from something science says doesn't exist. I don't know why I'm sharing this now. Maybe because I'm getting older and I don't want this experience to die with me. Maybe because I hope Tommy or Jeff might somehow see this and reach out, so I'd know I'm not the only one who still remembers. Or maybe I just need someone, anyone, to know that on a hot July day in 1980, 3 12-year-old boys saw something in the Louisiana woods that defied explanation, something that showed fear, intelligence, and the same protective instinct any human mother would have for her child. I don't expect you to believe me. I'm not sure I would believe it myself if I hadn't been there. But it happened. And not a day goes by that I don't wonder about those creatures and what they might reveal about our world if we could just understand them. Story 14. I don't normally share this story with people. When I do, they either think I'm making it up or that it was just my imagination as a kid. But I know what I saw that day in the summer of 1979, and it stayed with me for over 40 years now. I was only 5 years old back then, living with my family in the military housing at Fort Polk near Leesville, Louisiana. My dad was stationed there, and our house was right at the edge of this huge wooded area that seemed to go on forever. Those woods were my playground that summer. That day was hot and sticky, like most Louisiana summer days. I remember wearing my favorite red t-shirt and these blue shorts my mom had bought me the week before. I wasn't supposed to go into the woods alone, but all the other kids were busy, and I was bored out of my mind. So I snuck out while Mom was doing laundry, heading straight for my favorite spot. I had discovered this massive fallen oak tree about a quarter mile into the forest. It had probably been knocked down during one of the big storms we had that spring. For a 5-year-old kid, that fallen tree was like the coolest thing ever. It was my pirate ship, my spaceship, my secret hideout, all in one. The best part was this little family of possums that lived in a hollow part of the trunk. I'd bring bits of bread or fruit from home and leave it for them. I named the mama possum Mrs. Whiskers. I thought I was so clever with that name. So anyway, that day I made my way to my spot, stepping over roots and ducking under low branches. The woods were alive with sounds, birds calling, insects buzzing, leaves rustling. I knew these woods like the back of my hand, every path, every clearing. Well, at least I thought I did. I reached my fallen tree and climbed up on it, balancing with my arms out like I was on a tightrope. The bark was rough under my sneakers. I was hoping to see Mrs. Whiskers and her babies, but they weren't around. I sat down on the trunk, dangling my feet, and just enjoying being on my own in the quiet of the woods. I must have been there for about half an hour, just playing and exploring around the tree. I remember finding this really cool stick that looked like a wizard's wand and pretending I could cast spells on the trees around me. Kids stuff, you know. That's when I felt it. It's hard to explain, but there was this sudden change in the atmosphere. The woods got quieter, not completely silent. I could still hear some birds and the wind, but different somehow. It felt like the air got heavier. I remember getting this weird feeling, like someone was watching me. I looked up from where I was playing and peered deeper into the woods. At first, I didn't see anything. The trees were pretty thick in that area, with lots of shadows between them. But then I noticed something moving, way off in the distance. It was tall. That's what I noticed first. Really tall. Moving between the trees, still pretty far away, but definitely coming in my direction. At first I thought maybe it was someone from the base, like one of the soldiers out for a hike or something. But something felt wrong. The way it moved wasn't right. As it got closer, I could start to make out more details, and that's when my stomach dropped. This thing was walking on two legs like a person, but it definitely wasn't a person. It was completely covered in dark, shaggy hair or fur, from its head all the way down. The hair seemed to move slightly with each step it took. I remember just freezing there on my log, my wizard stick forgotten in my hand. I couldn't take my eyes off it. It was moving steadily, not rushing but not slow either. Just this constant, deliberate pace straight toward me. And the weird thing was, it didn't seem bothered by any of the obstacles in the forest. It just moved through the brush and around trees without slowing down or changing its pace. What really freaked me out was how quiet it was. In the movies or TV shows, monsters always roar or make scary noises. This thing didn't make a sound, no growling, no roaring, nothing. Just this silent, steady approach that somehow made it even scarier. I don't know exactly how far away it was when I finally snapped out of my frozen state, maybe 50 yards. Close enough that I could clearly see it was covered in dark brown or black hair, that it stood way taller than my dad, who was 6'2", and that it was 100% coming straight for me. Pure terror hit me like a physical force. I dropped my stick and just ran. I jumped off that log and took off running as fast as my little legs could carry me. I didn't look back, I didn't call out, I just ran. The path back to our housing area suddenly seemed 10 times longer than when I'd walked in. Branches whipped at my face and arms. I tripped over roots but scrambled back up immediately, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. My breath came in these desperate gasps, and I remember this burning feeling in my lungs. But I kept going. The worst part was not knowing if that thing was following me. I was too scared to look back. All I could think about was getting home, getting inside, getting safe. Every cracking twig or rustling leaf behind me made me run faster, convinced it was right on my heels. I burst out of the tree line into the cleared area behind our housing complex. The sudden sunlight after the dim forest was blinding for a second. I remember seeing Mrs. Hendricks hanging laundry in her backyard and just blowing past her without even saying hi, which wasn't like me at all. I was a polite kid usually. I ran straight to our back door, yanked it open, and slammed it shut behind me. Our dog, Rusty, started barking like crazy because of how I'd come crashing in. I locked the door, something I never did, and then ran through the house, locking the front door and all the windows I could reach. My mom came running from the laundry room, asking what in the world was going on. I was crying by then, trying to tell her about the monster in the woods, but I couldn't get the words out right. I was hyperventilating, pointing toward the woods, saying something was coming. She thought I'd seen a bear or maybe a wild boar. They were common in those woods. She made me sit down, got me a glass of water and tried to calm me down. When I finally could speak clearly enough, I told her about the tall, hairy creature that was walking on two legs. I remember the look she gave my dad when he came into the room, that kids and their imaginations look that parents give each other. But I knew what I'd seen wasn't my imagination. I refused to go back into those woods for the rest of the summer. My dad even took me to the edge of the forest the next day to show me there was nothing to be afraid of, but I wouldn't set foot past the tree line. I had nightmares for weeks after, dreams where I couldn't run fast enough, where that thing caught up to me just as I reached our back door. The strange thing is, I never heard any strange noises from it. No howls or screams that people sometimes report with Bigfoot sightings. Just this silent, relentless approach that still gives me chills when I think about it, and the way it moved through the forest, like the undergrowth and obstacles weren't even there. That's what stands out in my memory the most clearly. We moved away from Fort Polk the following year when my dad got transferred to another base. I haven't been back to Louisiana since then. I'm in Virginia now, have been for years. I've got kids of my own, a job, a normal life. For a long time, I tried to convince myself that maybe my parents were right. Maybe it was just my imagination, or I saw a bear standing up or something. but a couple years ago, around 2003, I was clicking around online and found this website with stories about Bigfoot encounters. Reading those accounts brought it all rushing back, the fear, the certainty of what I saw. So many details matched up with what other people had experienced. That's when I knew for sure that 5-year-old me hadn't made it up or misunderstood what I saw. I've tried researching if there have been other sightings around Fort Polk, but there's not much information out there. The military doesn't exactly encourage rumors about giant hairy creatures roaming around their training grounds. But I wonder sometimes if other military kids had experiences like mine that they never reported or that got dismissed as childish fantasies. What I saw that day changed how I view the world. It opened up this possibility that there are things out there we don't understand, things science hasn't explained yet. I'm not some Bigfoot hunter now or anything. I've got a regular job and a regular life. But I know what I saw wasn't a bear, wasn't a man in a costume, wasn't my imagination. Sometimes, when I take my own kids camping, I find myself scanning the tree line, wondering if I'll ever see something like that again. Part of me hopes I don't, but another part wishes I could. Just to confirm, once and for all, that my 5-year-old self wasn't wrong about what he saw in those Louisiana woods back in the summer of '79. I still wonder why it was approaching me that day. Was it curious? Territorial, meaning harm? I'll never know. All I know is that for those few minutes I was being deliberately approached by something that shouldn't exist according to everything we're taught. But it did exist. And sometimes, on quiet nights when I'm alone with my thoughts, I wonder if it's still out there in those woods and if any other kids have seen it since. Story 15. I still don't sleep right when November comes around. It's been 20 years since that night in 2003, but I can close my eyes and see every detail like it happened yesterday. I've never told this story outside my close circle because people think you're nuts when you mention Bigfoot, but I know what I saw, and I need to get this off my chest. I was living in Sabine Parish, Louisiana at the time, rural property with woods backing up to my land, nice and quiet, exactly what I wanted. That night was cold for Louisiana, probably in the low 40s, clear skies with a bright moon. Around 10 p.m., I took my dog Rusty out for his nightly bathroom break before bed. Rusty was a lab mix, about 85 pounds, good watchdog who wasn't afraid of much. We'd been outside maybe 10 minutes. Rusty was sniffing around like usual, while I just stood there enjoying the quiet, thinking about work the next day. There was a street light about 50 feet behind me that cast enough light to see decently into the yard, and the moon helped too. My eyes had adjusted well to the darkness. That's when I noticed it. At first I thought maybe someone had come onto my property. There was this shape standing next to my tool shed about 20-25 feet away. The shed backed up to the tree line, and this figure was just standing there, completely still. My brain tried to make sense of it. Maybe it was a shadow. But no, my own shadow was falling in front of me, nowhere near where this thing stood. Then it shifted its weight. I froze completely. Every hair on my body stood straight up. Whatever this was, it was huge. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Bear. No, bears don't stand like that. Person in a costume. Out here. At this hour. Rusty noticed it too and pressed against my leg. He wasn't barking or growling, just whining softly and pushing toward the house. That's what scared me most. Rusty would normally go crazy at any intruder, but he was acting submissive, like he knew we were in the presence of something dangerous. We just stood there, looking at each other. Me and this creature. I couldn't make out facial details at that distance in the dim light, but I could see its outline clearly. It was massive, standing at least 8 or 9 feet tall, with incredibly broad shoulders that must have been 4 or 5 feet across. The body was covered in what looked like dark hair or fur. The proportions were all wrong for a human. Too big, too wide. I'd guess it weighed around 500 pounds, easy. Something made a noise off to my right, probably a raccoon or possum, and both of us turned to look. That's when I smelled it. The odor hit me like a physical force. Have you ever smelled a deer that's been wet, or a wet dog that rolled in something dead? It was like that, but intensified by 100. Musky, wild, pungent enough to make my eyes water. When I looked back, the creature had shifted its posture. It was now leaning slightly forward, arms hanging down but slightly away from its body. I swear to God it looked annoyed, like it was irritated I hadn't run away yet. I got the distinct impression this was a male, based on its size and the way it carried itself with this dominant presence. Then it did something that turned my blood to ice. It rolled its shoulders forward and took a half step in my direction. It wasn't charging, but the message was clear. It was considering it. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty I was looking at a Sasquatch, a fucking Bigfoot, in Louisiana, on my property. I'm not ashamed to admit I backed up immediately. Rusty was already pulling toward the door. I didn't run. Something told me running would be a mistake, but I moved backwards steadily until I reached my back door. I didn't turn my back on it until I was inside with the door locked. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone to call someone. Who would I even call? Police? They'd think I was drunk or crazy. Instead, I grabbed my .45 from the gun safe. It probably wouldn't have done much against something that size, but it made me feel a little better. After about 15 minutes of debating with myself, I worked up the courage to look out the window. Nothing. I turned on the back floodlights and slowly opened the door, gun in hand. Rusty refused to come back out, which was another red flag. He never missed a chance to be outside. I stepped out cautiously, sweeping the yard with my eyes. The creature was gone, but I could hear something moving in the woods, branches breaking, undergrowth rustling. Whatever it was big and not particularly concerned with being quiet. The smell still lingered in the air. I didn't sleep at all that night. Kept all the lights on and sat in my living room with my gun and dog, listening to every sound outside. By morning, I'd almost convinced myself I'd imagined it all, or exaggerated the size in my mind. The next day, I cautiously went outside to inspect the area where it had been standing. The ground was soft from recent rain, and there it was, a single footprint that made my stomach drop. It was huge, about 5 inches wide at the heel and easily 18-20 inches long. The impression was deep, confirming whatever left it was extremely heavy. I took photos, though they don't really capture how unsettling it was to see that print in my own yard. That was just the beginning. Over the next 3 years, I had more encounters. Not always visual, sometimes just the sounds or the smell. My brother came to visit about a month later and heard something screaming in the woods that, in his words, wasn't any animal that should exist. My neighbor reported something huge crossing the road about a quarter-mile from my place. 2 friends who came over for a cookout the following summer both saw a large, dark figure watching us from the tree line before it disappeared. The worst was about 6 months after the first sighting. I was taking out trash around dusk when I heard something large moving parallel to me just inside the tree line. Whatever it was kept pace with me for about 40 yards. I could hear branches breaking, but never got a clear view. Just the sensation of being watched followed. When I got back to the house, I found 3 large rocks stacked on my back steps that hadn't been there before. Just 3 rocks, one on top of the other, simple but deliberate. I installed game cameras after that. Most nights they caught nothing unusual, but occasionally they'd be moved or turned to face different directions. One morning I found one camera completely destroyed, like something had crushed it in a powerful grip. The last significant encounter happened about 3 years after the first one. I was driving home late, about half a mile from my house on the rural road leading to my property. My headlights caught something crossing the road ahead, something huge moving on 2 legs. It crossed the entire width of the road in 2 strides and disappeared into the woods. I slowed down but didn't stop. When I passed the spot where it had crossed, that same powerful odor filled my car through the air vents. I moved away from that property in 2007, couldn't take the constant feeling of being watched anymore. I told the new owners there was a lot of wildlife in the area, but couldn't bring myself to tell them what I'd seen. Sometimes, I wonder if they've had their own encounters. I've spent years researching Sasquatch sightings in Louisiana since then. Turns out, there are hundreds of reports from the area, dating back decades. Many in Sabine Parish and the surrounding forests. Local hunters have stories they only share after a few drinks. I've connected with others who've had similar experiences, and our accounts match in ways that can't be coincidence. The size, the behavior, the smell. I still can't explain what I saw that night. I know what it looked like, but accepting the existence of something like Bigfoot goes against everything we're taught about what's real. All I know is what I experienced. A massive, intelligent creature that was as surprised to see me as I was to see it. Something that had probably been living in those woods for years, while people like me built houses at the edge of its territory. Sometimes I dream about that moment when we stared at each other, this impossible creature and me, both of us, trying to make sense of each other's existence. I wonder if it tells stories about the human it encountered that night. I wonder if it's still out there in those Louisiana woods, watching other houses, other people. I don't have proof beyond my experience and the similar accounts of others who've seen the same thing. I don't expect anyone to believe me. But I know what I saw, standing in my backyard on that cold November night in 2003. And no amount of rational explanation has ever been able to convince me otherwise.